tonight. Appreciate you being here with us and showing your support for our city. I'd like to remind everyone here that this is a regularly scheduled meeting. That the notice of the time, place, and agenda has been posted on the city website, given to our media, and also on the Utah State website. So we'll go ahead and start by doing roll call. Councilman Labrum here. Councilman White, he should be coming. Councilman Baird here. Councilman Wake here. And Councilman Burdick here. To begin, we've asked our city manager. There's Councilman White. He's here. We've asked our city manager to give us a prayer, and then if all of you would follow me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Heavenly Father, we thank Thee for this opportunity to meet together. We are grateful for those that are willing to serve our community. We are grateful for the blessings that Thou hast bestowed upon us. We ask for Thy Spirit to lead and guide the discussion tonight. We ask that Thou would please bless our community and our city, that it might grow and prosper. We ask for Thy guidance in the decisions that are made. We ask that Thou would please bless our public works, our public safety, and those employees that work for the city, that they might be able to be protected and guided in their work. We say this in the name of Jesus Christ.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Has everyone had a chance to look at the minutes and see if there's any amendments or corrections that need to be made? We'll go through them page by page. Page 1, page 2, page 3, and page 4. Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Motion by Councilman White.
Second it.
Second by Councilman Labrum. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. I know I sound like a broken record when I say this, but we do have a comment period at the beginning of our meetings. Any member of the public can come up and address the council for up to 3 minutes if anybody would like to take opportunity tonight.
I have an ask.
Okay. Go ahead, Dave.
Do I need to have here?
Yes, please state your name and your address.
Dave Brotherson, Duchesne County School District. As we're getting ready to move over to the new high school, we're trying to prepare some of our fields and those things for different sports. And been doing a little work with baseball and we're converting the soccer field to, or the football field to soccer. And we're taking all the field events for track and moving them across the street. And so as we do, we pull the curbing out and then we need to reseed. And Dustin was working up to the parks the other day and I just asked him if he could come down with his overseeder and with his little sander. We borrowed that a few years ago from the golf course and maybe level those up just a little bit. And he said he would be glad to. But needed to go through proper channels. We could pay, we just don't have that equipment. We don't use it once every 10 years. And we would rent it from you or pay an hourly rate. Dustin said he would do it on his day off so that it doesn't conflict. Was wondering if you could help us out just a little bit there. We would even work our tractor he knows how to run the gauges on the cedar and all of that, so that it's the right pounds per acre, knows the right seed. He has the contact. I drive to Morgan to get the seed. It wouldn't be any cost to the city other than your equipment. So I'd just like to ask you to consider that.
Mayor, we had a meeting where he was speaking about what he's been doing on some of ours just recently about the reseeding yesterday morning, I guess it was. And what a big difference. I think it'd be great to help, and we've always worked well together, the district and the city, and especially if he's willing to do that voluntarily.
I agree. Any other comments on that?
I think we send that to our city manager and go over it. So we can't make a decision formally as a council.
Right. Just to throw it out there too, my personal opinion, since we can at least voice our personal opinion, is moving forward. Obviously, I've mentioned in the future wanting to have an Arts, Parks, and Rec committee with the school district being a participant in that. I mean, we use their facilities from time to time for different sports and things like that, and I think whatever we can do to foster that relationship and help one another out with those types of things, I think is a good thing. So I'm just throwing that out there. So, thanks, Dave. I appreciate it. Any others? Seeing none, we'll move forward. Our first item, the 800 South Serve project, we went ahead and postponed that for next meeting. Did you want to?
It will actually bid on July 3rd, so we won't bid it. It's been delayed for the bid, so the bid opening will be July 3rd, so we'll be in time for our next meeting. So
perfect. And we do have some visitors with us today, beginning with Rob Sant with the community reinvestment process, and he has a presentation. Ryan, do you want to, and Rob?
yeah, I'll pull this up here.
Turn some time over to you.
And Rob is with Lewis and Young. I reached out to fellow city managers across the state, asking about community reinvestment and tax incremental financing. And the word I got back was the one that I should invite is Lewis and Young. That's the firm that does it. And so we've gone to the one that does it best, and we've invited them to present to us and teach us about how this works and some of the different intricacies. It's gone through a few different names, I understand, but currently it's called Community Reinvestment Agency, but it's been called other things in the past. So that's the current name for it, correct? And then I would turn it over to him, and I'd open the slideshow here.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to come and talk to you. I'm really excited about this. So just a little brief introduction. I'm Rob Sant. I'm a senior analyst and senior project manager at Lewis, Young, Robertson, and Birmingham. It's a really long name, so we go Lewis and Young, or LYRB, even shorter than that. But we are a financial advisory and consulting firm based out of Salt Lake City, but we've helped cities, counties, special service districts from Garden City up in Bear Lake all the way down to St. George. So we're the experts when it comes to this. But as Ryan mentioned, so it's Title 17C is the in the state code is where they kind of describe all this, and that's kind of the legal section that governs community reinvestment agencies. You want to go to that next slide. So this is kind of just an overview. So as Ryan mentioned, right now the title is Community Reinvestment Agency Act. This was a recent change in May of 2016. Before that it was called the Community Development Act. So this was kind of a financial tool that the state created back in the early 1980s to assist municipalities with economic development in their jurisdictions. And back in the 80s, it was called Redevelopment Project Areas. And then in 2011, they changed it to the three that are in that paragraph. So Community Development Areas, or CDAs, Economic Development Areas, EDAs, urban renewal areas, URAs. And then in 2016, they decided to make it simpler and kind of combine everything, and now it's all called community reinvestment areas. And there's two tracks or two types of community reinvestment areas or CRAs that you can create. The first one we call it's for a blighted area. And the main reason why you'd want to select that track is you have the power of eminent domain. The second one is if there's no blight. And later on in the presentation, I'll kind of go over what we mean by blight. That's the next slide. So what the main financial tool is called tax increment. And this is kind of a graph that explains how tax increment works. So what we do is we create a survey area of different parcels that you'd like to survey as part of this CRA. And the first thing we do is we take what their current assessed value is. So that little blue line at the very bottom represents the base year, we call it the base year tax revenue. And so what we do is we freeze that in time, and whatever tax revenue that produced, the different taxing entities, the city, the county, the school district, they keep that annually during the life of the project area. Then we negotiate with each taxing entity to give us a percentage of the green and purple, which is the new growth. In this graph, the green represents the new increment retained by the taxing entities. So that is, after we freeze the base year, so in this one, let's say it's in 2022, any new development or any increase in assessed value above that base year, that's called tax increment. And redevelopment agencies use that revenue to pay for infrastructure, to revitalize areas. There's a list of things you use it for. So the green, so for example, we just negotiated one up in Davis County where for 15 years, the CRA, the Community Reinvestment Agency, they got 50% for 15 years, and the taxing entities got 50% for 15 years. And then once that time frame that's negotiated ends, that red bar represents the new taxes that go back to the taxing entities. So they get the base year plus all of the new growth that occurred during the life of that project. Go to that next slide. So this kind of explains tax increment a little more. So it's not a tax increase. We don't raise our taxes. So that's a benefit of it. And then that increase in property taxes within the CRA project area is an increase in the assessed value that's above that base year, as I mentioned. So I talked about how it's frozen when we create the project area, and then everything above that base year is the revenue that you can use for redevelopment within that area. Next slide. So these are some of the, this is outlined in the state code. So this is some of the things you could use why you would create a CRA. So to provide assistance for existing businesses. So some redevelopment agencies, they'll kind of have what's called a revolving loan fund. So what will happen is if there's an existing business that wants to improve, within their business or the outside, things like that, you'd actually give them a low interest loan. They would make those changes, and then they would pay back that loan, and that money would kind of be reoccurring for other businesses. Any new development, if you have some greenfield that needs to have some roads, sewer, anything like that, you could also use it to help offset some of those infrastructure improvements. With CRAs, there is a new requirement that 10% of the tax increment has to go towards affordable housing. You could use that within your city, which is kind of what we encourage, or you could also pass it along to the county, or even pass along to the state for them to use.
On that one, there is a law that requires us to pay a certain amount for homeless to the state, and that comes out of our sales tax.
Mm-hmm.
This could be utilized to pay that one. That 10% could go towards that as well, right?
So it's pretty broad. As long as we can show that it benefits affordable housing, then you can use it for that. You could even use it to build a road that benefits affordable housing. So it's pretty broad what you could use that 10% for. To reduce crime, to expand employment opportunities, and really any other community concerns or priorities that you So that now this is kind of the different tracks. So this first one is for a non-blighted area. So the first step is you would create a community reinvestment agency by an ordinance. This might have already been done, but if so, it was back in the 1980s. And so what I would do is we'd reach out to the county recorder and see if they have the certificate. What you do is you create the ordinance, we send it to the lieutenant governor, and then he sends us back a certificate that says you've created a CRA and we recognize it. And so, go ahead.
Just a question on that. Like a town of our size, do they usually have the council be the agency created by ordinance, or do they usually have, how does that formally work?
Yeah, so in any city, the redevelopment agency board is the mayor and city council. So you would be the executive director, and then the city council would be the board. So it's almost like you're wearing two different hats, but yeah. It's a separate legal entity, but it is city council and the RDA board. Then the second step is you authorize, we call this a survey resolution, where we identify it and include a map, and it basically grants the staff, the agency, and any consultants permission to prepare a project area plan and to survey the area to make sure that it qualifies to be a project area. And then once we have that, we research any potential development and project needs, and then we create a project area plan and project area budget. And this plan and budget are kind of what governs the project area. So it includes a forecast of how much tax increment we think we're going to produce, the different participation levels, the time frame, and the plan kind of describes the current land uses, the future land uses, and things like that. And then the fourth step is we're required to have a public hearing to adopt the project area plan. So you hold the public hearing, and the redevelopment agency or the reinvestment agency, you guys adopt the project area plan and budget, and the city council approves the plan. And then once that's done, the project area, it's effective. And then the final step is you go through and you negotiate and you adopt interlocal agreements with the various taxing entities. And that interlocal agreement is what specifies that you'll receive a percentage of the tax increment for X amount of years, X%, and also identifies that base year value. The time frame for that is anywhere from 2 to 4 months. It's heavily dependent on step 5, negotiating with the other taxing entities. We just created the Facebook project in Eagle Mountain, and that one was 2 months, whereas another one that we did in Sandy was 8 months. So it's really just depending on that taxing entity negotiation. So the next slide. So this is if you're going to want to have blight and have that power of eminent domain. So step 1 is the same as the other one. We need to make sure that we have an agency. Step 2 is you still adopt that survey resolution, but the difference is you also authorize the agency to conduct a blight study. And now what a blight study is we go through in that survey area and we do a parcel by parcel blight investigation where we take photos, and the 17C lists different criteria that signify blight. So dilapidation. So if there's a lack of curb and gutter in the sidewalks, if there's broken windows, if there's peeling paint, it's pretty, it lists specific things. If there's a higher crime rate within the survey area than without the survey area. If there's any environmental hazards. So there's 7 different criteria that we look for, and we take picture evidence of that criteria, and then 50% of the parcels have to have at least one of those 7 criteria for it to be blighted. And those 50% of parcels need to equal 66% of the overall acreage. That's kind of confusing, but yeah. So, and then we have the RDA board holds a blight hearing where we present the findings of blight to you, and you guys adopt a resolution that says, yes, there is blight in this area. And then the drafting of the plan and budget are the same. Having a public hearing is the same. The big difference here is instead of going through an interlocal agreement with the different taxing entities, we create what's called the Taxing Entity Committee. And that committee is made up of 8 different members. There's 2 from the city, 2 from the county, 2 from the school district, 1 from the state school board, and 1 from all the other special taxing entities, so the water district, if you have a rec district. And then that tech is what we call it. They adopt, and you negotiate with them, a resolution, and that has to be passed by a supermajority. So 6 of the 8 members of the tech have to agree to participate. So it's kind of an all-in or none. Whereas with the interlocal agreement process, the city and county can agree to do it, whereas maybe the school district doesn't. You could still receive that tax. And then the next slide. So any questions?
Not as much questions, but I want to, part of the reason that we're talking about this tonight is we've had some discussion about Main Street and some of the other areas in Roosevelt that, you know, need redeveloped or need a little attention. And so we've been trying to figure out ways on how to generate revenue and get money to help some of those business owners and to help some of those areas. So this is one of the recommendations and that our city manager has found, and TIFs, tax incremental financing, those types of things. And so that's why we're talking about this, is looking at Main Street and a few other areas of our town and how we go about gathering funds to do some of those things. And so just wanted to throw that out there. And any questions?
Sizes, as you do these things, can you specify a smaller area in just different sections? You don't have to have just a big bulk area.
Correct.
Are there, you can be real small or real large?
Yep, there's no limit.
Okay.
I kind of think there's 2 different types of areas. So you kind of have I almost want to call it like a strategic plan area. That's kind of maybe more broad for your whole Main Street, or in North Salt Lake we did one for, it's basically 350 acres. And that one was kind of just like we didn't have a specific project. It's just like we met with the city council and the board and determined we'd like to see residential, and we kind of just formulated a plan. And then there's another one where we created a Smith's Marketplace, and that one was just enough parcels to have the Smiths. So it's really, you could do either or.
Or together?
Correct. Yep.
Same entity can have more than one area, or
Yeah.
you have to.
So you could have multiple areas. So there's some cities that have 1, there's some cities that have 15, it's whatever you'd like.
So Rob, if you would have gone with the CRA and into the tax negotiation portion of the other entities, are there guidelines that guide that process from the state level, or is that more of a true go in, negotiate, beat each other over the head type of situation and come out with the best resolution you get?
So the interlocal agreement has to have some specific language in there, but it's really open-ended. You know, you could have different base year values. So there is language, but it's not like a certain criteria. So you can go in and, you know, if the city wants to give 100% of their increment for 20 years, and the school district wants to do 20% of their increment for 10 years, that's allowed.
With the Central Utah Water Conservancy District, there's been several occasions where, with different cities out on the Wasatch Front, we've given up 100% of our tax revenue to assist them in things like this. And so I think the negotiation comes, I don't think they would be too happy if we took 100% of the school funds, but maybe your kids would be.
But the nice thing about it is it's only on the growth, and then that growth, it is what it reinvests to build more growth. So that growth actually is an investment into expanding and growing. So if the district or any of the entities came on board to invest in that, they invest in a short period of time to get growth and expansion in the area, and then when that expansion has occurred, then the net result is more tax base over a long term. So taking it from a long perspective, every entity probably should, if it works out, should all benefit, by the tax increase.
And that's kind of what that graph shows, that, you
So
know,
at that point,
you
they're,
start here and you
they're
get there.
getting some of that growth as it is each year, so it's not like it's a reduction of their revenue. They get to keep their revenue that they have. It's just, you take, for instance, Stonegate. Their values were one thing. We increased the value of those, by fixing the sewer, by fixing some of those things. There's an increase in property values, and there's a potential that that could rise, or the next house that it facilitates, the property tax on that next house could go in, and some of that could grow. The base rate to the county or the city or the school district, all of that remains constant. It's just what additional amount is available. So at that point, they're held harmless to that point. But some of them need that growth in order to continue, and that's why some are only portions. So we wouldn't expect 100% from the school district, but any amount from them would make the project more available for investment, which would grow it, which then brings them back a return on that investment. So.
And so usually what we do in our project area plan is, there's no legal term for it, we call it a but-for analysis. Basically it's kind of a paragraph that says, but for tax increment, this area wouldn't develop in the time frame or in the density without public participation. So we kind of build that, so then when we go approach their taxing entities, we kind of have all that information, and we say, you know, let's just say, for instance, Main Street, you know, it's been this way for 30 years, and nothing's gonna change unless we do something different. And so by investing a little bit, you're gonna see that growth a lot quicker than if we didn't invest in it. Typically, in different cities, you know, you see a 2 or 3% annual growth rate, whereas in these areas, you know, it could be 120%, it could be, you know, 60%, just because development's incentivized, which usually makes it happen sooner.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and take some from the public.
Yes, sir, sorry. I would just want to know, you know, if you could get more out of the district or that, could you do anything with the taxes pertaining to severance tax? Is there any way that you guys can finagle that instead of going to the state goes more towards this?
So the state's got different things that they're kind of obligated, so usually you don't participate at the state level. This is more your local taxes. If you have a high, so the Governor's Office of Economic Development, that's usually who you negotiate with, and they're heavily dependent on high job creating developments, or sometimes they could do an energy tax rebate, so things like that. So this is usually just when you get your property tax.
Whatever shows up on your property tax, those taxing entities that fit on that, or that are listed there, that's where this would be spent.
I wasn't sure if they could finagle that on the back.
Any place we get money from the state, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
that's exactly right.
And then you could also, you could use sales tax as well for this. We typically don't see that, we don't suggest that unless it's a high sales tax generating company that comes in.
Great. Any other questions for Rob?
I would just ask, once we get there, how interested the council is to move forward and what direction you'd like to go. But anyway.
Mayor Ryan.
I just had a question, I think, for the council in considering this, and for, if we come to a public hearing, both would want to know, maybe they do, and I just am not knowledgeable on it, but they would want to know how an entity like yours, Lewis and Young, gets paid. Do you get a percentage of that increase, or do you get a flat rate, or how are you compensated for your efforts?
So typically we would come into a contract with just a flat rate. So depending on the magnitude of the project area, usually when we create these, they're anywhere from $10,000 to, depending on how big they're up to $25,000. So it's usually a flat rate, and it's not an annual thing, it's just usually it's a contract with a not to exceed amount.
Good deal. So did you want to,
I would recommend that we move forward with something, whether it's Lewis and Young or whether we go out to an RFP. if the council is interested in moving forward and creating one, that we look at that. If this is something you want to move forward with, that's kind of what we're looking at, kind of education and where you want to take this. We've talked about it a few times just in general terms, but this is good detail, and here's where you want the next step to be.
So the question is, do we want to make a motion to continue with Lewis and Young tonight? Is that what you're
You
asking?
could, or we could take
do we
it
want
out
to do
to
more?
a request for proposal and get multiple and have them see. I
think
will
that's
tell
what
you,
we-
at this point, the vast majority recommendation came from them, that's why I invited them.
That's what I'd like to see, is a request for proposal that we could actually look at, and then, once the proposal's submitted, then we can look at it and say, yes, we want to, but that's just.
And I would assume that's a standard for you, right?
Yep. It depends. Sometimes we have clients we work with, and so they don't, but you see both definitely.
Well, if we need a motion, I would entertain a motion to at least move forward with a request for proposal.
Just have a question, Mayor.
Yes.
Rob, relative to this process, is when you do request for a proposal, is that something generally you'll come in and visit with city management team and say, what area of town or what area of the city is the council looking at, and you put a proposal for that? Or it seems to me that you would want to have a little bit of direction on what you're proposing.
So usually in your proposal, you need, to have either, one project area to help with 3 different project areas. And I'm more than happy to send Ryan a couple of RFP examples that we've seen to help with that. But usually you need to have a little bit of information of kind of what you're
Scope.
asking for, yeah.
So I guess with that, Mayor, my motion would be, not necessarily a motion to do it, but let's move forward as a council in establishing areas we would want them to propose on, and then move forward to requisition of proposal.
I would agree, and I think we ought to talk to the RDA and a few other entities that would be affected, and get them to another council meeting where we could discuss some of those things, or at least a meeting offsite where we could discuss some of those things and put those together, and then bring those to council for consideration, and then move forward that direction.
The other option, and I think that's a good one, the other option is maybe to have him come, give us, maybe I could go out with him and give us an idea of what the areas are that he's seen, and maybe give us a suggestion of what areas might be included in that. And maybe he could bring us some ideas of saying, hey, this is a blight area, and maybe this is a economic development area. Maybe we could drive around and be able to discuss some of those.
Question is, Rob, how much time are you willing to invest, or you know for sure?
So, we're probably willing to do that once, and that's also something we could do, Google Maps is really good. That's something else we could also just do, with your input, Ryan's input, we need to do that. Locally, we could do that as well.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, I say, I don't know that we necessarily need a motion, but before next council meeting, let's identify some of those areas that we would consider to approve in a motion to move forward to request the proposal.
I think this was very helpful on where we're wanting to go, the direction. So,
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, appreciate you being here.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next item, Merchant McIntyre introduction. Would you like to go ahead and introduce?
Yeah, Mark McIntyre is here with us. He is flown in from the West Coast, but lives in Washington, D.C. We've presented it to the council before for contract and discussion. We've checked references around the country. Has come highly recommended in what they do for us, and we have contracted with them to work for us with the next 90 days to have a introductory period. Hopefully we can get in that time period a resource inventory, as well as being able to identify some projects that we could have large funding. These are projects, and correct me if I'm wrong, but these are projects between $1 and $10 million project. And as we move forward, these can be economic development projects, these can be infrastructure projects, and so we're looking to see moving that needle farther along. So we've invited him, he's been gracious to come and meet, and so I'll turn it into him.
While you're coming up, I'd like to just brief those that are here. So we've discussed grant monies that are available at the federal level that require some expertise to get. And so we've decided as a council to hire basically the Merchant McIntyre group to work for us in that regard, to see if there are some funds at the federal level that we could get for these larger projects that Ryan's talking about.
So, thank you for having me. Since we have an audience of interested citizens, I should probably start by letting them know that we've made it really easy for these guys to fire us. And while that sounds funny, it's true. We proposed a 90-day audition. And at the end of 90 days, we'll either continue or they'll lovingly throw us overboard based on what we produce in the first 90 days. So do you all have a copy of the Federal Funding Action Plan? I'm old school, so I don't have a PowerPoint. This is my PowerPoint. And by the way, since you all live in the real world and I don't, right? I've lived in DC for, next month it'll be 33 years. So just imagine the brain damage I've suffered. It's nice to be in a place where you name the name of Jesus. And I simply want to encourage you that every session of the House, every session of the Senate begins with a prayer, and that God lives in Washington, D.C., as well as Roosevelt City, even though you'll never hear it on the evening news, not even Fox. And the toughest ticket to get in Washington, D.C., does anybody know? Right, it's not to an inauguration. Those are pretty easy. And it's not even to the Washington Redskins. The toughest ticket to get in Washington, D.C. is to the National Prayer Breakfast. First Thursday of February. We have it in the biggest ballroom. You can watch it on TV and satellite. And the satellite breakout rooms. And they still don't have enough seats. I came to Christ back in 1988 at the National Prayer Breakfast, and what I was counseled to do, what the cool kids do, is if you've had that experience, you give your seat to somebody else. So I stand in the lobby, just watch folks go and enjoy it. Okay, so my pledge to you all is to be clear, be brief, and be gone. How does that sound? Despite the introduction. So you've got the plan. I certainly don't need to read it. The objective is obvious, right? The objective is to deliver significant federal dollars for the various priority funding needs of the city. If you go through the situation analysis, the federal government is going to spend $4.4 trillion this year for the T. By the way, that number never goes down. Any fiscal conservatives here? Okay. All right. I thought so. So I simply want to, at the risk of being remedial, right, I simply want to make the point that these dollars that we win for the city do not add a single penny to the federal budget. Right? We're pursuing competitive and discretionary grants that have been authorized and appropriated by the Congress. You good on that? Okay. If you go down to situation analysis, the third bullet, Roosevelt is eligible for EDA grants and USDA grants. My job, the job of my agency and my grant writers and subject matter experts, is not to make you eligible, but to make you competitive and to actually win the grants. If you go to page 2, the very last bullet, I think you all have seen a list of our municipality accomplishments. Ryan has a copy. I can give him another one if you all need to review it. But the good news is that everything on your list of priorities, we have experience in having previously funded. And by the way, again, since this is a public hearing, you all did significant due diligence.
right? You reviewed our accomplishments, you asked for 10 references, most folks asked for 2 or 3. And so you've done your due diligence. If you look through the scope of work on page 2 and 3, long story short, and these are just the key elements of our work, long story short, Merchant McIntyre is your federal grant staff, right? All of you have at least one day job. I'm assuming that Ryan has at least one day job, right? Our job is to do the lion's share of the work in working on these grants. If you go to the bottom of page 3, in the section, the Merchant McIntyre team, again, I just want to highlight a couple of key facts. So we've been doing this for a long time, since 1994. And the reason we reached out to you all is because we're passionate about serving rural municipalities. If you look at our accomplishments list, primarily we worked on behalf of rural municipalities and other nonprofits. And there are 2 principles that we follow. Number 1, we never chase money. Right? We only pursue dollars that are aligned with what you all need. Principle number 2 comes from a high school science teacher, Helen Childs Boyd. She said, the trouble you don't get into, you don't have to get out of. Now, as a teenage boy, that was totally lost on me. Right, but I get it now. And everyone has a horror story about federal grants. And typically the horror story begins with what happens after they've won the grant. Right? And that's because, respectfully, they haven't asked the right questions at the outset. Right? The trouble you don't get into, you don't have to get out of. We're not going to pursue a single federal grant unless Ryan and you all decide, yeah, we can borrow this trouble. Right? We want these dollars, and we can pursue this. It makes sense. All right, last section here, the budget section. Ronald Reagan is my favorite president. And when he was dealing with the Soviets, he had a Soviet proverb. No vri, no provri. Trust but verify. Right? Trust but verify. And so this 90-day audition is an opportunity for you all to trust and verify. So the deliverables are listed here, right? This is not a magic show, it's a process. So tomorrow, I think we're going to begin in an aircraft, right?
Yeah, I think we're gonna go over, see, and show you the oil field, so you can see how it relates to us.
Yeah. Does the aircraft have doors on it?
That's 2 doors. That's 2 doors.
So I view.
I'm gonna be the pilot.
Okay.
You might need 3 more.
I view the resource inventory as a baptism, right? So my job, our job, is to immerse ourselves in Roosevelt City, who you are and what you need, through the filter of what's available at the federal level. So step number 1 is to conduct the resource inventory tomorrow, and my business partner, longtime business partner Brent Merchant, is not here in person. He'll be on the phone with a couple of our people. By the way, Brent coaches Little League. And because he does a good job at that, he was named to coach the All-Star Little League team, and the first game was tonight. So that's where he was tonight. We will, out of this resource inventory process, within 30 days, we're going to put together a comprehensive federal grants grid so that you all as the council can see in black and white what grants we're pursuing, or what grants are available, what the dollar figure is, when they're due. All right? And then the verb I like to use is we pulverize. We pulverize these federal grants. So a federal grant announcement might be 100 pages long. And what we've already done with Ryan is we've boiled down a build grant, formerly a Tiger grant, so that's Department of Transportation, EDA grant, and then there are both implementation grants and planning grants. We boiled those down to what we call threshold questions, right? And that's the key, right? So we're gonna get deep into these threshold questions tomorrow and decide which grant we should target build planning grant, build implementation grant, EDA planning grant, EDA implementation grant, or other, so that we can deliver a grant win the fastest for you all. The third step in the process is for the mayor to decide who comes to DC so that you can actually meet the federal program officers who have jurisdiction over the dollars that you're seeking. And as I said at the outset, at the end of the 90 days, based on the progress we're making on winning these grants, and based on our added value, you can decide whether to continue or not. So I'm happy to answer whatever questions you have about the resource inventory process, what we're thinking in terms of grant targets, or how we operate.
Thank you, Mark. Any questions?
That was great, very clear.
I appreciate that.
Never been to DC, so maybe this will be an opportunity to go and see what you did.
Clearly.
I do have a question. When this was first proposed, I don't remember all the details, but these grants, they usually require some match money from the city, that kind of thing. Would you go back over that and,
Yeah.
and
So,
help us remember?
so every grant is different. Some grants require zero match. Some grants require 50-50 match. And it's essentially everywhere in between. Okay, so you'll know before we pursue any what the match would be. And if there's not a match available, that's a good reason not to go after it, right?
Some of these, if we can get 50-50, and we can take that to a CIB application and get, 50-50 of what's remaining, we could facilitate that. Or if it's a project we're already planning on doing, and we're planning to spend 100%, but we get 80% grant, we can either do more, or other projects. So there are some of those, with the budget we plan what our projects are out for the next 5 years, and we put that amount each year, into our capital projects fund so that we can utilize those. So if it's a project we are expecting to do and we can accelerate it, but be able to spend less for it, then that's really one of the things. So
On the CIB end of things, I think that, working with an entity like this is very advantageous too. When CIB sees that we went to other entities and solicited money and are getting grants from other entities, they're a lot more willing to pitch in as well. So I think that's gives us a little more.
And likewise the federal funders, right? Do I understand correctly that you won a state grant recently?
we have won a federal grant for Brownsville. We have done that one, and as a coalition, and we have had various state grants. We just got our 1.3 million for infrastructure grant to move forward on. Just this last week we were there and got that, and we're going here in the next just after our next council meeting, we're going to go for our master planning grant. So we continually apply for grants constantly.
Yeah, so that's good for at least two reasons. One, it tells me that there's some internal grantsmanship capacity already here, right, that we can multiply. And secondly, federal program officers like to see that a council is pursuing dollars from other entities as well. So that's a friendly fact for the meetings in DC.
So Mark,
Yes,
I
sir.
would expect you to know exactly which ones would come our way, but if you were to categorize grants that fit really well for small municipalities, could you share with the council and the citizen that are here tonight what those would be?
Yeah. So the top two grants would be an economic development administration grant, because number one, you're eligible, and we have a history of winning those grants, even for municipalities that aren't. And those are typically, the ceiling on those are typically $3 million. Now, the Congress, so that's Aaron, that's one grant. The other grant that we're looking at hard, because it's timely, it's due next month, is what used to be called a Tiger Grant, now it's called the Build Grant. And the Congress took a 500 million pot of money and added $1 billion to it. And that number is not gonna go down. And so based on the answers to the threshold questions, we may be submitting either a planning grant or an implementation grant for build. Those would be the top two. And then the answer, the fuller answer is based on what we learn tomorrow. I tease my staff that I'm going to rename the agency Road, Water, Sewer, right? Because we do road, water, sewer, and then, beyond that, law enforcement, technology, public safety, pedestrian walkways, that kind of thing. It's really driven by what you need.
Any other questions? Thank you for being here tonight.
Appreciate the time. All right, thank you all.
Look forward to working with you.
Likewise.
Great. Are there any questions from the public on that? Okay, we'll move on. So EDC, Ryan has informed me that EDC of Utah wasn't able to make it out. So the Economic Development Committee of Utah won't be here tonight. But we have invited a few people to be here just because we knew we would be talking about economic development. We'd like to open it up to the public to a degree and let the public know kind of some of the things that we've been focusing on, and also like to hear your thoughts and ideas on maybe how to pursue and organize ourselves to keep the ball rolling on some of this, and also include citizens in some of the thought process and the planning, and other entities that we could coordinate and work together, and some of those are here. So with that, I'd like to kind of open it up to the public, and as we've talked about these things tonight, what are some of the thoughts or ideas? And Rob, if you have any input as we're discussing some of these, we'd love to hear. But what are some of the thoughts and ideas of how we could organize ourselves to kind of move some of this along? Or would you like to know what we've done first, and then we'll go from there?
That'd probably be helpful.
Okay.
Some of your thoughts.
So some of the things that we've discussed as a council is, we have different entities in the community. So we have the hospital, we have Strata, we have educators, we have private business owners, we have co-ops, we have all of these different entities in our community that are working and trying to build their own businesses and their own organizations. And the thought came is, how do we get everybody working on the same page, working and coordinating their efforts? And how do we get the feedback that we need to adjust our ordinances or laws here to make it easy and convenient, but efficient, and we still have to follow certain things to facilitate economic growth, to not only benefit the businesses that are here, because we want to focus on those primarily, but also focus on other businesses that would come here. Some of the thoughts that we've had is to form a committee, an organization where we'd have representatives from each organization come and meet on a regular basis to discuss those things and to flesh some of those things out and to identify different areas that we could work together and facilitate that economic growth. So with that, there's been some proposals or some ideas of how that committee could be structured, how many members that committee would house, but it's something that I feel like tonight, having a committee that could have identified and been working on those blighted areas already would be a great jumpstart to what you're trying to help us with, for example. And so that's the type of thought process that we've had. I don't know, some of you that are here, how do you feel? Would it be beneficial to have a committee where we meet regularly and have that discussion, and or is it something that we could do in a different way? What's your thoughts?
Want to see what we stand or just talk from our
Just
seats,
talk,
or-
yeah, we're just having that, this is more casual.
I guess I'll throw out a couple of ideas. First of all,
Maybe introduce yourself and who you represent.
Yeah,
Just
that's
not
a good
everybody.
idea.
Jim Marshall, President of Uinta Basin Healthcare in the community. Mr. Mayor and Council, appreciate the opportunity to come here tonight and talk about this. Had a chance to talk to the mayor just a little bit about this in some sidebar discussions as we've been talking about economic development in the community and different things, and I've kind of thrown out a few ideas. I think one of the things I look at from an economic development perspective is, as a hospital, we're, I guess in many ways, we're reliant upon the population, we're reliant upon the federal government in many aspects for our growth and expansion. And as our community shrinks and grows, that's sometimes a challenge as we try to flex. We also provide always a 24/7 operation. I would love to look at and be a part of evaluating or creating a way that we could focus on proactive growth of our community. Maybe it's through infrastructure, making it easier for businesses to come to town, businesses to grow. Some of those might have to be in competition with our organization, but I think as I look at growth in the community, growth in our population, I think that'll be very helpful to our organization as well as to hopefully many other businesses across our community. And so I've seen it done a couple of different ways. I've lived in other communities where they've had they've had economic development committees where they've had multiple business owners and community members participate. But I'm open to many different ways of approaching that. I guess from my perspective, I know the council's very busy, the mayor's busy, the city manager's very busy, and if there's some things we can do as a community to step up and provide some support to you, whether it's myself or staff at the hospital or other community members, I'd be happy to participate in any way, shape, or form that can happen to help move the organization or the community forward and make it stronger.
Mayor,
Yes.
we had a training meeting in St. George a month or two ago, and they talked about, one of the sessions was about economic development. And something that maybe I just wasn't aware of, but for those of you that have businesses, sometimes there's a stigma that I gotta protect my share of the market, so if somebody else comes in, that's gonna hurt me. But the presentation said that in other areas where they stimulate growth in an area, 80% of that growth comes from businesses that are already there. 20% is new. So most of our efforts are going to be put, 80% of our efforts are gonna be put to the people that are already here and try to get their businesses going. One of the challenges that we have is obvious, the up and down oil market, because that will take business away and it'll bring business back. Our challenge is to try to find something that kind of levels that off. And if we had a crystal ball, we'd already know what that solution was, but we don't. But just for those who may be concerned about protecting their share of the market, 80% of what we're gonna be doing is to be helping you grow your services and businesses.
With that, Mayor, I just asked the question too. One thing I'd be really interested in hearing, from your perspective, all of you, what can the council do to assist you in your business growth, in your expansion, in your missions as an institution? To me, is even more important than anything that we can possibly do. Are we doing the right things or are we not doing the right things? Those are questions we've got to ask ourselves too. Sometimes we think we're doing the right thing, but in fact, maybe we're not, or vice versa. So I'd be interested in hearing from your perspective, how can we help? What's the most helpful thing to do?
I think just part of the planning meeting, like Jim has talked about, just knowing our intentions. As we look at growth, there are some years when oil is good that we're going 7 and 8%. If that continued over a 3 or 4 or 5 year period, we would be building another elementary school. Is there the infrastructure to support that? Where would that be located? How would that affect your streets? How would that affect travel throughout the community? Would we be able to do boundaries? Those type of things. And I think just understanding the intentions you know, where we are purchasing property for long-range planning, those type of things. You know, we've had those conversations, but those may have been 5 or 6 or 8 years ago. And that just needs to be constantly on our mind as we're planning to move forward, you know, as we're funding streets and those type of things.
I think that's a great point, and that's, I think what you said, Dave, is one of my concerns with the fluctuations in the population and how busy we get and the economy. Sometimes when we have a meeting like this and we discuss those things, 6 months from now, that'll be a totally different story. And so or what mechanism do we have in place to constantly have that communication flowing so that as things change and adapt and evolve, that we're constantly in communication with one another, making sure that those needs are being addressed and in a timely manner, and that everybody's communicating with the other to make sure that what this side's doing, how it affects this side, it's all being coordinated.
Throughout the decline in oil, our enrollments have continued to rise, to grow. We've never had a decline in enrollment in the past 10 years. It hasn't been as great. It's been 1 or 2%. We have been as high as 8. But just through the last couple of years, the last year, it's been 2%. So we continue to grow.
And that's amazing because most people in the general public would not assume that.
Absolutely.
But in the past years, being one of the older generation here, met many times with Irene being there and other community people, business and all associates in trying to grow. And the biggest thing was pushing the growing of the education, USU and Unibasin Tech, and working, and we'd meet, and it was different business, government, school, and we'd talk and share things at least on a monthly basis, and sometimes more as things got growing. And it takes that communication, and we should do it in good times and bad times, and that helps level things off, because none of us, we all would like growth, and none of us like the booms, and none of us like the bust. But that's life. I mean, that's just the challenges of life. So this is a great thing, and we just need to do it and share information of growth. I would bet 9 out of 10 people in the Unibasin have no idea that the schooling population has kept growing even with 4 years of kind of economic decline in the basin. That I don't know. I would assume UNA is similar, or do you know, Dave, on that?
UNA is similar, but they're gas, and so they are just a little bit different. As you look at the counties, we're more oil, which is a little more stable, so they fluctuate just a little bit more than we do.
We've been down quite a bit longer than we have.
Yeah. And we were told when we actually built our building, and we started 10 years ago, 2008, the main thing that really tipped it with my brother and I when we did it was the gas. That's what we call it. It's here and it's there, and there's a constant demand, and that's going to be the stable point. And it's almost like when we signed on the dotted line, that changed. You know, they found lots more gas in lots of places, and it's not under federal or Indian or any government. And so it's always so variable of what there's just no crystal ball that gives you all the answers, does it? But it is communication and working for the good of everybody. We would like to see things grow as a car business. The dealerships don't really like mom and pop stores. They want all the Ken Garfs and Larry H. Millers, and so they only deal with one dealer instead of 20 dealers. I mean, that's their mentality. So we fight on both directions on that. It's an amazing time, and there's no guarantees. They take bankruptcies, they do things. So I've loved how hard everybody has worked and how you adjust, and the education and the medical fields have both brought in jobs phenomenally. How many employees do you have?
Just over 700.
And we're missing one, who's just Strata.
Yeah, I've got, I'm here representing Strata on that one. But you know, we're at 260 right now, or continue to grow on that. But one thing I guess I'd like to mention is that we're looking at other opportunities coming into the basin. We're working with UB Tech right now on a program, a technology program with them to be able to provide more employees for us and for other people. That, you know, the technology we've got. I guess people don't often realize what a good system we have here, a good network we've got. I mean, we've got fiber, really good fiber in here. We've got multiple redundant routes. I mean, back in the old days, you could get cut off in Park City or in the canyon, you're dead. Now we go through Park City, we go through Price, we go through Colorado, we go through Wyoming, and we've got routes upon routes for the rings, so that, you know, sometimes it might go down for a minute, but we can usually correct it pretty quick, even if it's a bad outage, a fire. But we've got a great network that can support other businesses that come in. You know, if they want to come in, they need to understand from the city that, you know, we can help. If we know where they're at, we can make sure that they're in a good place for fiber, and we're trying to get fiber to everywhere else.
Yeah.
But we can provide the network.
Well, and I think you're in a unique position too, because if we did have, let's say we did meet together and had a committee or whatever, so you would be instrumental in being able to provide information as to, you know, what you can provide as far as fiber and communications to a certain area. But at the same time, you're a large employer in our area too. And so what can we do to capitalize on that? I mean, I know there's some things that you guys have already been doing, which is fantastic. And we just want to support that and help grow that. It's like, it's like Councilman White said, we don't have a crystal ball and it's hard to tell, but I can tell you, I feel confident with as many bright minds as we have, not only in here, but in our community, getting some of those together and discussing those things on a regular basis would do a lot of good for all of us involved.
Thank you so much, Mayor. And again, since Strata didn't brag quite enough on themselves, I'm going to kick off from there. You know, the reality is, if you, one of the things that we can all do is go to the annual meeting Thursday night.
Yep.
And be there as an advocate, because unfortunately there are people who are uninformed. I'll give you an example. Entrada, who is a national firm that deals with rentals, condos, people moving in, getting repair work done, taking reservations across the nation, employed tens of thousands of people. They decided to look for about 30 people who could work from home. That's made possible because of Strata. And that's the only reason they're looking in our area. Interestingly, when we put the word out, they got 180 applications, and they're coming out next week to interview. So, you know, I feel very fortunate, and I think this committee is great, because I think once you have the knowledge of what is going on in this amazing area, in our region, and in our community, you're blown away. We are the envy of rural America. You know, Moon Lake Electric is another good example. I went to their annual meeting, and unfortunately in the actual meeting part, the food was great, and there's a couple of thousand people in for that, but in the meeting part, there was probably less than 30. And how important it is to really, and yet in that meeting, it was phenomenal. I mean, I'm telling you, you could easily, I'm shocked we weren't all blown on the floor because of the unbelievable amount of economic development that they're doing. Infrastructure and all those things that are just out of this world. We are the envy of rural America. Having this technology, Commissioner Todd and I went to a conference of other communities that are dependent on oil in Ohio, and we sat amongst people from Mississippi, Pittsburgh, Texas, and these are rural communities. There's about 15 communities, and we finally quit bragging because we almost were embarrassed. We were embarrassed for the communities that didn't have a hospital, that had no health care. They were bragging that they finally got one person, a nurse, that could do stitches, so that if it was a stitch, they didn't have to drive an hour and a half to a hospital. That was in Texas. Talked to other communities that were still on dial-up. Other communities that again, their electric rates 21 cents a kilowatt hour. I mean, I can just go down the list. Communities that couldn't imagine that a community, our county, our size, a region our size, has a college and a university. Again, we finally had to quit bragging just to keep from, because we thought it was getting out of hand. And again, we do, I mean, for me, I'm able to keep up on the stuff that this amazing city is doing, that our county is doing, that our hospital is doing, that Moon Lake Electric, that our school district. You know, every person that I bring into town, every person, I don't care if they're here for a doctor's appointment, I take them by that high school and I sit in front of it and cry. Because it is something that will pave the way for a better future. People are gonna move here just because of the education that we have here. It's unheard of. I'm gonna have 5 granddaughters in that school next year. Unbelievable opportunity. It's unheard of. We are the envy of rural America. Can we grow? Can we improve? Is there more to do? Absolutely. But man, I'm telling you, we have a wonderful city here. We have the best citizens that care. Even I can't leave Dave out. I mean, look at the financial institutions. A town our size, and we have 3 or 4 or 5 excellent, healthy financial institutions. How many communities do you think, I can text Dave at 10 in the morning and say, I have a client coming at noon, can you meet with us? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is yes. I can text Dave Brotherson, I've got a corporation interested in coming or looking at investing. Can we meet with you this afternoon? 9 out of 10 times the answer is yes. And the same with Ryan. I hate to keep bragging you guys, but we have, and we can build it to be better and greater. And we have the leadership on this council is unbelievable. I'm so proud of what we have here. And I know I'm getting old and probably the grandma's coming out in me, but we are the envy of rural America, and we can build it bigger and stronger. But I'll tell you, this telecommunication thing, it started in the basin talking about remote jobs, and I can tell you on 3 state websites today, even the governor said in his State of the Union address, you know what, the state is the largest employer. They employ over 25,000 people in the state of Utah. What is stopping them from opening some of those positions up to rural Utah? For people who can work from home, Strata is the key to that. And there is not another area in the state that has what we do when it comes to Strata. In fact, you can move to downtown Salt Lake and you won't get fiber to your business. So we need to understand what we have, promote what we have, help each other, brag on our community, and be the best advocate we can. And I think communication is part of that. I promise I'll hold back half at every meeting, I promise. I promise I'll hold back half.
Irene, I appreciate you making those comments, because that is important for us to understand, and we have been very blessed in this area, and we have some amazing things. And I think we don't want to try to detract from that and say, you know, we need to grow because it hasn't been great. It has been great. There's some really great things that we can continue to do, even greater than we've done, if we can come together and organize ourselves. And I appreciate your work, and that's part of the reason of even having this tonight is poor Irene's been on her own for a good long time. And she's done a great job, and we just want to make sure that we're implementing things to give her and the council, our staff, the support. And not only that, we really want to hear from the public and get the public involved in this. Moving forward, we'll go to Bobby and then we'll go to Dave.
So, Mr. Mayor, I just, as I think about economic development, and one of the things that I think a lot of us are struggling with, this young man mentioned it with Strata, we're struggling with it at the hospital, Dave is struggling with it at the school, is getting talent, right, to our community. And one of the things that I feel like maybe this committee could do is, I feel very in tune with my industry, and I'm completely oblivious to the largest industry in my community, which is the oil and gas industry. I have no idea what they need or what they want or what they're trying to attract.
Yeah.
And I'm just, you know, as a nursing recruiter, most of my nurses are females. They have husbands. What can I do for the husband? If I can bring the, right? Do I have, you know, so we need to be working together to attract that talent and build that infrastructure that says the whole family can prosper. I've got good schools for your kids. I got a place for mom. I got a place for dad. But so I think that's a key thing is bringing all us together so we understand each other better. You know, Aaron's, Councilman Waite's, position at school, obviously, we work together to say, he says to me, what do you need? Here's what I need, and he develops programs to bring that talent, you know, working on, you know, expanding the program now and building a new program, so, yeah, I'd love to be a part of it, and I think it will help us as a community as a whole, just understanding better what each other is trying to do. Like I said, we're over here, you know, like a duck paddling in the water, and somebody else is probably duplicating our efforts.
Right, and I agree with that statement. I think that's exactly the idea behind it is to get those people together and to make sure that the left hand knows what the right hand's doing.
Right.
And, you know, that's something that's difficult for the council to be able to accomplish and have meetings like this, a regular meeting like this. But if we had a committee that met regularly to talk about those things and to assist with those, I think that's critical. One of the things that we looked at as far as the committee goes is having, you know, public relations, a subcommittee of public relations, life sciences and, life sciences and education. So that's where the hospital and the education would come in. Then we had a sector of redevelopment and infrastructure. And then we have another subcommittee that would have been, you know, just the entrepreneurs and oil and different private businesses in the area that could come and talk about that. And so it'd be, the way we anticipated it would be a 12-member council committee, and each subcommittee would have 3 members that would represent those different areas. And so each you know, strata, hospital, education, private sector would all have 3 members from each of those different areas to communicate. And we can add to that, we can change that, we can modify it. It's just something I think you hit the nail on the head.
I just wanted to talk about one of my favorite things is many hands make light work. And I know each of you on the city council, most of you I know personally. I know you don't have the time to deal in all the different areas that you have, but if we had the opportunity to involve a lot of people in economic development or business development, whatever you wanted to call it, I know it'd be a positive thing. I remember back, I don't want Dave to take this wrong because it was a school district, but they tried to do a revolutionary thing in the school. And the school, members of the school committee tried to do it on their own. And it fell completely on its face. And everybody stepped back and said, hey, what did we do wrong? And they went out and brought a whole group of people in to help. They came up with the exact same solution, but it was a complete success. Simply because of the involvement of a lot of different people. And I'm just very impressed with what was presented here today for the council's forward-looking. Irene, you can't say enough for her. She's Miss Cheerleader for Duchesne County. She had to be paid $1 million a year. So, but
if I did, I'd give it out.
Some of you would. Some of us have been involved in. I actually sit on the UBAG Economic Development Committee, and I've seen some great things there. Irene, a lot of people are not even aware of some of the things, you know, your BEAR program and all those other things that have added. I personally have been the recipient of about a $10,000 grant from the state, thank you very much, because of information given me by Irene. And all those things are available, and the more people you can involve to free up you guys to do other things, and then to bring those ideas back to you and say, hey, we've come up with this idea, will you support this? Much like we do on the Planning and Zoning Committee. Hey, this is what we've decided. What do you guys think about that? And I think it'd be a great idea to have an economic development committee. And I love the way you had it designed. I think that's a great idea.
Yes. Dorothy has been our BEAR outreach person. Raise your hand, Dorothy. She's visited probably every business in Roosevelt 3 to 5 times. Hold up your packet. We take that out. It fills with tax credits, incentives. Probably visited 500 basin-wide, 200 to 300 in Duchesne County, 150 probably in Roosevelt. interacts with them. We visit them sometimes 4 or 5 up to 10 times. Because of getting, there are some things that can help them. If they don't know about it, then they don't benefit.
And I think that's a good thing that this could bring out too, is one of the things that we talked about, and Ryan and I have talked about, I went to a training, ULPC training, Utah League of Cities and Towns, and they talked a little bit about economic development, and the EDC was there. And they shared some of the things that they had, and Ryan contacted them for that reason. He also looked into it and saw some of the things that they have. They'll help, and we need that type of stuff available to the public on a website, something that all the tax incentives, all the opportunities that small businesses, large businesses, grants, whatever is available to the public to grow, we need to make sure that that knowledge is out there and available.
And one of the challenges we found, Mayor, is that people are too busy. They don't come to meetings.
Right.
They don't come to hearings. They don't come to state dinners to hear. The only way to do it, we found out, is that you have to go visit them. And you have to do it again and again and again, and take information, and then build relationships. And then pretty soon they are calling us. And we had a roundtable, a manufacturers roundtable discussion last week. We ended up with 75, which I didn't even know there were 75 manufacturers in the Uinta Basin, and there is. We had 75 come to a roundtable discussion last week. We had all the state, but the only reason they came is they were visited 5 times and had relationships. They wouldn't have come otherwise. So in fact, we were calling until 10, 11 o'clock the night before, reminding. That's the kind of effort it takes to get them out. But we ended up giving away several fairly good-sized grants there to help them. They met each other, and there's a couple of gun people that are doing some gun manufacturing here. Some great camaraderie was built, and even subcontracting with each other, using one of our machine shops in Duchesne to do some of the work. So those are the kind of things, but man, they don't come unless you build that relationship first. But that wouldn't be possible without our great community and without our great leadership that you guys have, and the leadership you guys have shown.
Thank you. Brady, yes.
And so I'm Brady Arlen with Delsco Northwest. I don't know if you guys know Delsco. Been here since '77. We went up and down with oil fields the whole time. So I'm more on the economic development side of that. You know, any new startup that we have, I'm a part of it for the first year, from ground break to go. So I think an economic development committee would be huge, because you can be proactive and reactive. You know, everything that we're talking about, when, as a private sector, when you come forward and you go to a committee and say, okay, this is what I'm looking for, we could be proactive on that side, where we say, okay, well, here's a good site for you. Here's a grant that's ready for you. Okay, also, are you looking to place somebody in this job or this job? You know, we've been working a lot with UVATC right now because we've got a shortage of drivers. You know, if we could have a place where we could all meet and be able to talk about that, and also where we could be reactive, where people like Delsco and like L&L, who've been here for a lot of years, and we keep growing. You know, we started out with 9 employees and we're up to 250, and we're still growing through the downturn. You know, and we want to stay here. We want to be a part of this. And if we could come to a committee like that and say, hey, we're looking for you, we're looking for a better place, we're looking for something, and we could say, okay, here's where your utilities are, here's where you have enough acreage, this would be the perfect place for you. Also, when we have a great man like this come, then we could already have those 7, you say there were 7 things that for the blight, so he could say, well, what's the 7 things? We'd have those identified, so we could be proactive and reactive in both ways of that. I think that, you know, unless, like the man from Zion said, unless you have all these great minds on one page, you're never going to get there. We're never going to get there alone.
And I think what we've done with what we've had has been fantastic. I just see a vision that we can do. I can't even imagine what we could do if we put that group together. So yes, sir.
So something I was thinking that might be more beneficial, instead of creating project areas right now, is maybe sending out an RFP to do an economic development strategic plan. And kind of what that process is the first step is you do demographics. So you know, what do we have? you do some, you do projections as well. And then some of the other things you do in that is you identify key areas. So you take care of that work. Main Street's gonna be an area. We had one city that was heavily dependent on retail. And they didn't really realize that in one part of their city, they had 4 different types of medical. They had and so we identified kind of that as this is the medical sector. And they were able to go and focus on getting more medical type of companies to come out. So you can, and then it's kind of, we say instead of taking the shotgun approach, you're taking a rifle approach where you identify these are 3 or 4 areas we have in our city that we want to focus on. You can take it a step further and you identify these are, you have a section where these are 15 financial tools we have available for us. You identify those, and then kind of the ultimate, the end product is you have 4 or 5 objectives, and then you have sub goals for those objectives and ways to accomplish those objectives. And then the last thing is you have the stakeholder process throughout the whole entire thing. You could have this economic development committee be part of the strategic plan. So when we do this, we hold 2 or 3 SWOT sessions where we identify strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats within the city. And that's good because you get SWOTs from the health sector, SWOTs from the oil sector, and you get all those, and you kind of label those, and then you come up with goals, objectives to capitalize on those strengths. You know, how many people know that you have such great telecommunications down here, you know, and you come up with some marketing tools and things like that. So I think maybe doing that economic development strategic plan would really help focus everything in.
I agree, and I think that's a good, that would be an integral part of that, especially in that redevelopment or what is it called now? Reinvestment areas and things like that. And I think that's perfect, you know, use of that committee and perfect use of what we could do there. With that, is there any other comments? I feel like it's something, is it something that if we did as a council, would we get the support, I guess, from the community and from the entities that we've already talked to? Absolutely. So with that, I think, you know, we can't officially make a motion tonight, but maybe we could have something, I would like to see something personally kicked off as soon as possible. One of the things that we learned, Dustin was there, and I think Councilman White was there and Councilman White was there, is that, you know, you get a plan together and you get it 60, 70, 80% there, and then you begin. You got to start somewhere and you begin. And then that's something that we can modify and evolve. We have some ideas on, well, but kind of like, tell me your name again. Rob. Yeah. I was going to say Sam, but Rob mentioned is, you know, we've got to have purpose and we've got to have those things. That would bring purpose to what we do. But there's several others that, looking at the state economic development committee and also the governor's offices of economic development. They're 2 separate entities, but looking at those types of things and the information they provide and the purposes just spells it out more than what we've discussed here. And I think there'd be more than enough purpose to what we're trying to accomplish and do. So with that, I would propose that at the next meeting, maybe we have something to make a motion on as far as get this thing off the ground.
It's a great turnout tonight. By invitation, like you said, there was personal contact. I know May, I just commend all that are here. And there's an organization that wasn't brought up. It's the Rotarians. That Dave's been a big instigator in our community. That's very volunteer, and it takes us so much time. I've tried to be in parts of it, but not been very good. And they have been such a volunteer group that has touched so many lives, and that's, I think membership has struggled a little bit recently with the down, but that's another part that can be involved because a lot of them are there being part of that right now. So thank you for that.
Yeah, on that same note, we'll talk about a Rotary project we're doing tomorrow at 9 o'clock at the high school. When you go to the open house later this year, you will note what they call a legacy wall, and it's going to be a big 16-foot wall just inside the entry area that has great quotes from our founding fathers. And I don't know exactly the whole thing. It's supposed to have interactive participation, the local high school Interact Club, in conjunction with the Rotary Club, raised the money for that. It's about $6,000 that we raised for that. And I think you're going to be amazed when you see that. Some of you have been to some of the other schools in the district, and some of them have this. And this was a project that Craig Ashby brought to our front, and I think it'll be amazing. You can come tomorrow at 9 o'clock and help us put it on the wall if you want.
Thanks, Dave. Really quickly, and then we'll move on to the next agenda item. I appreciate all the comments, first of all, and all the participation tonight. I think it's, I feel really good about what we're trying to accomplish as a council, and I hope the public does as well. And I feel like the more involvement we get with the public, the coordination and the buy-in, the better off we're going to be as a community. One thing that I wanted to throw out there as well is there's another committee that we discussed as a council, and I'll just mention it briefly. When you mentioned Rotary, Councilman Latham, it just came to my mind, is an Art, Parks, and Rec Committee. And that it would do the same, serve the same purpose, but in Parks and Recreation, and a different activities, UBIC, the Basin Arts Council, those types of things, bring those organizations together to coordinate those efforts as well and start to help that area. We're doing great. It's just to bring some of that. So hopefully, you know, as this moves forward and we see the success it'll have, we can see success in that other area as well. We're going to push the Duchesne County Water Conservancy District discussion, and we're going to move up the gun range discussion because those that are here for that, we'll cover that real fast, and then those that want to leave, and they can leave. But I know Duchesne County Water Conservancy District, that's a very interesting topic. We'll move that one a little later. So with that, the gun range discussion, that's been something that I know Ryan and I, we talked about that. We have Crescent Point here. They've been doing some work down by the sewer ponds in Ballard, just south of Ballard. And
that's where our gun range,
that's where the proposed
existing one is kind of down in that area too, correct?
Yeah, so there's a pistol range and there's a 100-yard range down there and a few clay pigeon throwers. And currently it's a private range that's utilized by our police. We have Rick here. He's hiding out in the back. But we visited with him a little bit about it. But ultimately, up to this point, it's just been utilized by city staff and certain organizations, you know, private organizations at different times. But we wanted to build something that would be more public and accessible to the public. It's a lot of area that the city owns, that is paid for by the taxpayer. And so we wanted to do something, try to do something with the development that's going on there in Crest Point. Had mentioned that they would be willing to participate, you know, to a small degree to move some of those things to accommodate some of the growth in that area and that they're experiencing. We thought it might be a good time to look at that and see what we could do as a community to turn that into something that would be really beneficial to the community as a whole and those that.
Where exactly is this located? Is this
Show on that.
directly south of Ballard City?
It is.
Offices?
Yep. So we'd be shooting at their office building.
Well, I know I've been out there with, I'm also a Boy Scout volunteer, and I've taken my scouts out there, and I don't know where exactly who owns it, but we've shot a lot of, done a lot of target practicing out just directly south of Ballard City. If you follow that road out, it kind of turns to the west, and right there is the top of a hill, and I'm just trying to envision where this is in relationship.
So it's a little further south.
This road right here.
Mile south of that?
It's a little further south. So part of it is there's already natural, natural backstop for that. And so I'll just kind of throw this idea out there, or not throw it out there, but just talk about what we've done so far and would like feedback on that as well. So ultimately what we've done is Strata has shown some interest in participating in something like that. We've had the hospital mention that they would be willing to participate in something like that. I've contacted Kevin Richens, who's with the National Turkey Wildlife Foundation, and he said that he'd be willing to. Joe is, he's probably the expert in the room on some of this. So, do you want to?
I reached out to the NRA, and they have a special class for mostly municipalities looking into something like that, where they train you on, I think it's a 2 or 3 day class or something. I believe 3 of us are signed up to go in October, and they kind of give you the basics of design and training on how to build a gun range for a community.
So some other people that we've contacted, thanks Joe, or thanks Councilman Burdick for that. Some of the other people we've contacted, Dirk Hatch with Vernal City, who was instrumental in, well, he runs and takes care of the Buckskin Hills over in Vernal. Commissioner Stringer was contacted, and he was worked with the BLM to get that approved. Luckily, this is private property, it's not BLM. It's owned by Roosevelt City, and so we don't have that hurdle to overcome. And so we've talked to several entities about it to see, how to go about it. One of the things that they mentioned is NRA, I didn't know this, they don't get involved with design technically with a gun range, just because they don't want the liability, believe it or not. So it would come down to, how we would design that. However, today, Dirk Hatch contacted one of his employees that does GIS, and they said that they'd be willing to go down and look at this and actually help design this today. So, which was pretty nice of them, being as they're in Uintah County and they already have one. So just from the community standpoint, when we saw that there was an opportunity to move some things around, we wanted to get everyone that involved that could be involved to make it something better. So just wanted to talk about it a little bit and see what the general consensus is, or if that's a good idea, bad idea. What are some thoughts on that? Andy and Jim?
I think it'd be fantastic to have a good, safe place that people can shoot. I mean, right now, people go wherever they can. A lot of times it might not be the safest place to shoot from or shoot towards. If we've got the property, if the city has the property available, I know at Strata we're more than happy to help with donations, in-kind labor, several things on that. We'd really like to see some of that, because we have a lot of employees that are very much into shooting, and just have a safe, clean, nice place they can shoot. I go to Buckskin Hills fairly often to shoot. It's just a nice range, and we've got, they don't really have anything over there that we don't have over here, that we can have a nice place here for our people. I have family and kids that shoot also.
Yeah. Do you know what Dirk said today? He said, we'd be happy to help you. That would help relieve some of the busyness at our range. No joke. It gets utilized so much. One of the questions I asked him was, because we were talking, honestly, there is some O&M that has to be done with that. So you're looking at, people bring their stuff in to shoot, and sometimes there's trash, and we talked about, maybe having some dumpsters up there to mitigate some of that. But there is some ongoing cleanup and things that you have to look at. And I said, overall though, do you consider it a benefit? Is it beneficial to the community? No doubt. They said no doubt. It's one of the most utilized things that they have out there at the Buckskin Hills. So, Jim.
I just, echo everything Andy said. I think he's right on the mark on that. I've driven over to Vernal a couple times to sight my rifle in and teach my kids how to shoot. I would love to have something in our backyard here that we can do that with. And from a hospital healthcare perspective, it just makes sense where we can have a place we can teach our kids proper gun safety and make sure they know how to use firearms. And I think just, growing up as a kid, I'd go out and shoot in the backyard and shoot birds and all these kind of things. And, now with the population growing, and there's just not a lot of room within city limits, we certainly need to spot where we can do that.
Go ahead, Bob.
Just a question, Mr. Mayor, is there room there to do other things? Like, you talk about Buckskin Hills, and it's not just a shooting range, right?
Yeah.
Is there room here, when we talk about economic development, are there other recreational opportunities here?
That's a good question.
Maybe not opportunity, but the property to do things.
Yeah, and I guess we look at that, and that comes down to, honestly, what do the people want? You know, the reason that was kind of looked at as a gun range is because that's currently where it's at.
Right.
I don't know how much other, like they have, well, I have a map of what they have. And so I know this is difficult to see, but if you look, this is their gun range on my right or left. And this is some of the other things they do. So the gun range actually shoots everything to the right. So they're not conflicting or interfering with anything on the left. So I don't know if that's a setup that we could have down there, but I think it definitely ought to be looked at. One of the things that they did say is, you know, they started the Baja track down there, and that's been a pretty good success, but then they have a biking track down there that has brought in a lot of people and a lot of revenue too. So all of those things I think ought to be looked at.
Right.
Part of the reason I think a gun range fits in this area is because you'll never have any development down there where Roosevelt owns it. With sewer ponds down there, it's not that desirable. And for a gun range, you want somewhere where when you build it, you're not going to have to worry about people building a house at the end of your gun range and then dealing with liability issues. But those things can all be discussed. I think the public should drive that, you know, but in this instance, you know, maybe, you know, I don't know, the gun range was what was brought up in the beginning. And so, but I think other things ought to be looked at.
One of the challenges with some other ones is that this is watered by affluent, and so some area is primary treatment of our affluent. So as we expand much farther, we have to be careful of those kind of contaminants that may have potential. But the gun range is a great idea on the north side. We already have the road that we've had built there.
Which Crescent Point is
done, which is great. And I think that there's a lot of interest in the shooting range. We already have had some of that activity down there. It would be nice to have a community range. Some of the other things, we have some other places that are possible, but there is some limitation that we'd be looking at probably the top 40 kind of area there. So, but whatever we can fit, we're open to fit.
That north pivot, if you look, it is hard to see because it's right there, is also city-owned property. And that would be opposite the direction that we'd be shooting in. So, like Ryan said, that could be an area of possibility of doing something else, you know, some type of recreational activity that brings people in the area. So
There is a small committee in our community working on biking trails, and that it's had a hard time really keeping its energy. A couple of them are moving out of the community but there are people that are trying to stir that up and get some trails, and we got a grant, there's a grant for our county that's gonna do proposals of these trails and trying to connect, and so there are things happening that way.
yeah, which is a perfect example of why once the Economic Development Committee is up and running, the Arts, Parks and Rec Committee gets up and running, the Trails Committee could be a subcommittee of that, where they come and discuss those things. And we have other areas of recreation come and discuss and start to, so that you don't have these ebbs and flows with participation. And it'll bring some stability to what we're trying to do. So, with that, is there any questions on, so that was some of the research that we've done so far. Looks like the planning would fall upon the city more than anything to
And I think going to the conference would be very helpful that way, and getting some information, be able to help design that. I think one of our next big things is, one, knowing the council is supportive. That's why we want to make sure it came before the council, so that council is supportive, and the public, and then be able to work towards formulating a plan. And I think with the three of us being able to go out there and getting some input, that would be great.
Yeah, and I think the plan could come prior to us going out. I think that would be helpful, but ultimately they won't tell us how to do it because they don't want us to come and say, well, you told us to do this. And so that maybe we could move forward a little quicker with the plan and getting that. I still think that's a great thing to train to help us, you know, the ongoing, how to run it. We've also talked about memberships, things like that. I did talk to Dirk about that today, and he said once you charge memberships, then you assume a lot more liability you're responsible for every person in and out of there. So if it's just open to the public, believe it or not, there's a lot less liability there. So, yes.
I just had I've driven that whole area and I know this is a perfect use for it, in my mind. The question I had was, do we have, or will we need to do anything for proper security for our existing sewer plant there that we spend a lot of money on? Just vandalism coming, knowing, you can drive and go right in and around behind it now because there's a gun range there, where right now it's pretty much inaccessible to the public.
Right.
But people get to know that, why we want to be sure that that's secure, keep people from swimming in that green pond.
Absolutely. And I think there's
That's where we sell the passes.
there's some
Another place to swim, you don't have to go there.
security fences all around that. The gates, the road that Crescent Point built gives us a separate access from the sewer ponds, which is a great thing. But you're right. We don't want people. And if they climb that security fence to get in there, they really want to swim in that for whatever reason. So we have a nice culinary filled pool here with, I don't know why they want to do that unless they just don't want to pay the $3 to get in.
They'll pay more to swim in
Yeah. But duly noted, that's definitely a concern that we want to look at and make sure that, we're not assuming more liability than we need with the sewer pond there. But with some of the things that's already taken place, I think some of those things are already beginning to be mitigated. I know I mentioned a gate. I'd only mentioned a gate and it appeared. It was amazing. So the staff was right on that as far as there's a road that you can kind of see that heads east from the sewer ponds that goes towards the two pivots there. There's already a gate to block that off so that they can't get that way. So definitely, and that's a good thought.
And at this point, we will, after this, we have some traffic that flows on the dikes of the sewer farm, but we move all traffic off except for those that are actually required to be there. So this other access is really opening that up. The farmers, the shooting range, all of that will move to that east access. So,
any other thoughts or comments on that? Okay, Rick, I know we visited a little bit about it. Do you have any thoughts on that, or?
I think it's a great idea. I personally aren't a big shooter, but there are tons in the community that are, and it's in my mind, a really inexpensive investment. We spend lots of money on city parks and baseball fields and all of that, and a lot of people use them tons. But a ton will use that too for a much less investment, I think.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. With that, I would like to at least see a motion to move forward and to designate that as a place for a shooting range and to move forward with the design.
I'll make that
Motion by Councilman White.
Second.
Second by Councilman Labrum. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes unanimously. So we're moving forward on it.
Thank you.
And we'll get ready for the Economic Development Committee. I will talk to you personally.
Thanks for coming tonight, everyone.
Thank you.
State agencies are always coming out and meet with us. We have a regular state group. And then we also have
Thank you for coming. Appreciate it. Chris.
Thank you. And hopefully that was voice for you. We appreciate you out there.
we wouldn't have switched, we were gonna have it down with you, but had done, so I didn't think guns in schools would have went very well. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. You don't have to.
Good to see you.
Oh, thank you, Ryan. Appreciate you guys. Thank you. My school lady. It actually, it is part of your job. It is. They come and see me all the time. Hey, Phil, it's a deal.
You're coordinating.
Yeah, yeah, we've got the World Trade Center coming out next. So he was mentioning about the state agencies. They're out all the time, seeing us and visiting and.
Hi, Rainey. Good to see you again.
But yeah, so anyway, if anybody's interested, please come.
What you said about Scrap.
Yes. One of the first in the nation.
Yeah. Been very forward thinking.
Yeah.
Thanks for all your good work.
Thank you.
Drive safe, everyone.
Will.
Yeah.
See you later.
Thanks, Hal.
You can stick around for the discussion on the water agreement.
That's okay, I gotta go cook dinner for a while. Have a good night, Hal. Thank you, see ya.
See ya.
That cleared up.
Let's send them all home.
We should have done the gun range last, I guess.
It was an energizing meeting though, because there are lots of good things going on, we kind of forget them at times.
Absolutely, that was a good.
It was very positive, all of them.
Great.
And Aaron, thank you for yours, on your part on the UB Tech and how aggressive you've been there for our communities and our children. Thank you. It's been great.
All right. Already worked with those entities, kind of gotten something going already on that.
Right, that's
really our, like I shared before, that's our key, that's what we do. I mean, we are the employee e-developer.
And with skills, and that's the critical part, they're just, everybody's looking for skilled people, and they're not out there, I mean, that's.
And I think hopefully what is proposed and what we plan on doing will take what you're doing and make it easier. One of the things really quickly that I like about doing an economic development is, I was looking at this sheet, and just before we go on, if you guys don't mind if I take just a few minutes, looking at the sheet of all the different assignments that we have as a council. We have several different assignments.
Do you have one you can share with us?
Yeah, in different areas, and I think if we look at all those different assignments, the majority of those can be summed up in 2 committees. And then we could have 2 councilmen assigned to an economic development, and 2 councilmen assigned to arts, parks, and rec, and cover all of this, the majority of this, in one meeting. Because we would have all of those entities that we'd normally go to individually at that one meeting coming, and then everybody would be there talking about what was going on and coordinating those. And then when we have our council meeting, it would make it more convenient and easier for the council to be up to speed on all that information. And I think it would be better information. So anyway, just a thought.
I think you're moving us in lots of right directions there.
I really liked conversations yesterday. It was fun to hear everybody talk about their thoughts and feelings. I would really like us, before we move forward on establishing the committee though, I'd really like us to invite our business owners, all of them, just to say, tell us what we can do to help you, just like tonight. But to give a big spectrum, because I look at, we had some key stakeholders here, which they're super important that we have them. But I also think we want to hear the mom and pop shops, the small ones, the one that have 3 or 4 or 5 employees. What can we do to help you as well? So so they get their voice before we kind of roll that out.
I don't understand. I don't understand. The Economic Development Committee would be that, the platform to where they could. The difficult thing for me is that we could hear all their concerns and all the different individual smaller businesses. But without having a mechanism to follow up and do something about that, I would fit that category. I'm 5-person operations. So.
We had planned on kind of a meeting over in the conference center that was gonna happen, but we weren't quite ready. I think that would fit what Aaron's, just a place we can invite everybody. Not everybody will come, but hopefully a few of everything will come, and and we can have kind of a discussion like this, and I think that's really all that's needed.
Yeah.
And we can move forward with putting this committee together, but just make
Yeah.
everybody aware.
As
of
long-
what we're doing.
Yeah, I guess that if we can move forward with the committee and get that rolling, I think we've spent a lot of time in talking to different people, and I don't see maybe, well, go ahead.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
So from what you're saying, I take it you'd like this economic development committee to be the ears of the city. So when all those businesses come together, I mean, what if we have the economic development committee set up and we're there and the new committee's there and we bring all the businesses?
I think that
Or
would
is it
be
to hear their concerns? Because I feel like the committee would be basically the platform that all those businesses speak to.
I think that's a perfect idea, because that would help them also have direction on, and that they would hear that personally, the committee, along with us, but then they would have direction on what way they would need to go and what things that they would need to research and look at doing to help. And I think that's,
Where are we at if we were to invite, to try to get 12 people? Do we have a list of 12, or do we have a list of 24 or 36? We're gonna have to actually invite more, because some of them won't be able to do it, but
well, I think
where
we
are
have
we
a
at
good,
with that?
I guess part of what where I think the missing piece is I like the thought process of the committee and the areas that they're going in. But let's say we lay out the committee and we have areas of focus. We have education, we have entrepreneurialism, we have, what was it, in healthcare? Something else.
education.
Yeah, we had education, entrepreneurialism, healthcare, and.
Oil field?
Yeah.
Well,
maybe it's
yeah,
oil field or-
just what you're talking about, so it would be businesses in general, in which I would like to see the chair of the RBA be in one of those positions, and then 2 others at large. And with that, when you have the RBA, you have a dozen businesses in that category right there, because they represent that whole group.
But I guess I see the committee as being great, but I think when we roll out a committee, we have to have a really good message to send to them on what is expected to happen, or the committee won't function, it'll die, is what I'm saying.
And we had, I agree, I do agree, and that's why we had a sheet that listed several purposes of the committee and what their job would be to do. And so they already know what, and it would be based on an ordinance. Those things would be put in an ordinance, their tasks, just like any other committee would be. And then, so they know their parameters and their basic objectives. And then they know the basic objectives, and then the more finite objectives, which would be tailored exactly to certain businesses or certain needs in certain areas, would come as that, after that committee is formed. And then to have a meeting like we talked about, where the businesses in the area would come and let them know, hey, these are our areas of concern. We could be there. 2 councilmen are going to be assigned to that when it's formed. And so even if the whole council's not there, we have a really good representation of the council that would hear all those things to bring those back to council also. So
I guess I'm not thinking so much of the council, but the committee members deeper. For instance, I mean, I probably serve on a dozen committees. And I would say, right, and I would say, how many of them are effective? Some, right? Some aren't so effective. But the ones that are effective have a really good established purpose that they're working for. So that's what I'm talking about, establishing a really good purpose. And if we have subcommittees of the Economic Development Committee, then when do they come back and have that cross-pollination of what I'm hearing here with a couple is, like for Jim, want a proactive growth approach and good coordination. I hear that from Dave Brotherson, Andy Adamson. So I see a huge coordination piece in there, which I think is very valuable. But it may not be as valuable if the entire committee's not involved.
Oh, no.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I get what you're saying, so maybe my description of the committee was not as clear. So the committee, the whole committee, would meet regularly, monthly, especially at the beginning. So we're talking all those subcommittees that we talked about, 3 members in each subcommittee, making a total of 12 members. They would meet once a month, all of them together. So what would happen is, as certain things came up in different areas, so let's say there's some infrastructure that needed to be done, the subcommittee would go and tackle that issue, and then the next time the whole committee met, they would bring the information back and say, this is what it's gonna cost, here's what it's gonna take, everything else. So they have that information. So the PR committee, as they meet, sees this is what's going on. We need to make this information available to everybody in the state, and we need to talk to the Economic Development Committee of Utah, and also the Governor's Office of Economic Development, and let them know what things we have and what we're ready for. And so that's their job, and then they bring that feedback back. So we're meeting as a full committee on a regular basis. The only reason for the subcommittees is to be tasked with certain things in their area of expertise to bring information back in the future, just like you have in, I think the city does that, the city staff does that. So they have a meeting where they get together once every couple weeks and talk about what each other's doing and everything else. But each one of them have their own tasks of what they do. They just bring that information back, coordinate those efforts.
One thing that might also be applicable to fit into this, and we've talked about it, but Rob brought it up as well, is that economic development master plan. So at this point, that's one of the master plans we're going after. But what would be nice is if we can formulate a group, once we have the funds to proceed, then we formulate a group that has all of those cross sections to be able to find out, all right, what really is the economic development master plan. And then if that committee were to work towards making sure that those goals that were established in the master plan were achieved, and that might be their box as saying, hey, here we always got to make sure as a charter or as an organization, what are we achieving? And if they're coming back to that master plan that's been approved and established by the council, I think that could be very good, because then that master plan will fit with the others. And as we build that network of master plans, then at that point it fits and comes back to the full master plan. Where are we going as a full city, not just in economic development? You know, we're applying for, I believe there's 7 or 8 different master plans within our application. And we're gonna go out. The CIB meeting is coming up. There's first the UBAG one, and then the actual CIB meeting is on July 5th to present our proposal, and hopefully they'll approve that at that point, and we can move forward. Our hope for that is this fall or winter, we're able to work on master plans. But if we can have either committee or maybe that committee comes along with that, maybe the broader input comes with that too. Because when we have that master plan, we want to have the most input we can so that we can have that master plan. My concern, if we get all the input at one time before we're ready to boil it down into a master plan, is that, are we able to get that nebulous up again and say, okay, now you gave us all this good ideas, now let's talk about more good ideas. I just wonder how that fits to it.
On the as far as the economic development committee goes, I think one of their tasks is to just bring information and thoughts and ideas as we're looking at formulating that master plan, because that gives us then as that they have buy-in, first of all, of that master plan, and then they have part of the responsibility to help implement those things. I mean, they can help with whatever. I mean, you saw the minds here and the thoughts and the ideas that were already shared, and that was just just touching the surface. When we start talking about these other things and maybe formulating a master plan, what are some of the ideas? What do we need to make sure is implemented in this? And we're not gonna take them all, but there's going to be some really good ones that we may have missed if we didn't have some type of a committee in place that would help and assist design that. So when we were at the economic development meeting down there at ULTC or ULCT, that's what they said is you get it, as far as you can get it or, close, get going, and then it'll evolve. It'll evolve into what it needs to be. I think there does need to be purpose. One of those purposes could be, we're looking at a master plan. We need some ideas. Here are some of the parameters, and we set those. This is what we're looking at within these parameters. What are your ideas? The other thing we could do that's already been done, not only the coordination that would be going on, but also, how do we build and enhance the businesses that we currently have? But we went through a list. I mean, there was a list that we pulled out of the Utah League of Cities and Towns document concerning municipalities and elected officials and their role in economic development. And those were listed. They put a few of those down, most of them. I put a few of them down. I think we have the purpose there. It's listed out fairly clear that we could get these guys, a group together and say, here's the purpose. We have several tasks that need to be done, several things that we need to look at. And
I guess that's really what I'm speaking to, is getting them a good purpose. And I think as a council, we decide, because what we may want to know maybe isn't what the state wants to know or anybody else wants to know, but maybe we want to know, like you're saying, we're going to develop an economic development plan. What do you think ought to be included? I want to know how I can help them. Before I move forward, I really want to know what can we do to be most helpful. So establishing those criteria so that we turn to a committee, that the committee can say, okay, we've been tasked to come up with recommendations or thoughts and processes on the following 4 things. Let's go to work. And then give them to them, let them go to work. But that's my concern is right now, maybe I just can't see it, but if I was a committee member, I would be confused on exactly what my purpose is, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think one of them that they mentioned already was just how can we recruit talent? That would be one of the objectives, I would think. But that's just one. And then, of course, getting funding for different economic programs from the governor's office would be another objective. But yeah, I see what you're saying too. There's plenty of things. Could we amend, once we get a plan in place that has a purpose, some purpose in there, can we amend it with additional things or maybe revise it? We can, right?
what's interesting is, to me, is so we have a list, again, already of a dozen purposes that are fairly broad, but purposes. And then as feedback comes back from the committee, and we see different needs in the community, then we don't have to list it out in the ordinance, you're going to do this, and then because that may change. That may change to something else, or we want to go a different direction. And so at that time, we say, up to, here are your general purposes, but here are some specific things that we have asked you to do. And then as those specific things change, then we can change those. But the set generic purposes that the committee is built upon doesn't change.
Well, I agree with you.
And those have been given to the council. And I guess we could go over those again. I think that would be important, especially if we, look at doing this in a couple of weeks. But I think those could be looked over again. And
do you recall if you've got that list saved somewhere?
Yeah, it's on Google Docs right now.
Okay. Well, let's just all look at that again, and then if we have any other ideas that we think ought to be on there, then I think it's been a long enough that maybe we haven't looked over this recently, so it will hopefully be what everybody will satisfy what people's concerns are.
I think as far as ordinance goes, we may be talking about different things. I'm not talking about the ordinance. The ordinance but when we give them something, we ought to be wise enough to task them with some specific things we're interested in. And those,
Absolutely, I think
those may be now, right, whatever it is. Let's give them 3 things.
Maybe
so that
right
they
now
have
it's
things to work on.
gathering public input on what they should do. Maybe that could be one of them. Right.
There's several things. I mean, we talked about it tonight, so we have the redevelopment or reinvestment areas that they could look at, and there's several things that they could be working on right now to assist and help, not to mention just the benefit each would feel of coordinating efforts and talking one with another and knowing what each other is doing alone is going to be a huge benefit. And so I guess for me, some of those things we can task now, and some of those things may come up in the future. But to have a body ready and available and organized to tackle those things as they come is invaluable in my mind. And the sooner we get it implemented, the sooner we can start to utilize that body. And we have several that we can task them with now, but there's going to be many, many more that will come up, I'm sure. So we have redevelopment, we have the master plan, we have the coordination that would happen between them, we have areas of possible growth as far as maybe looking at areas for potential and future development. One that comes to mind for me, that if we had had a committee like this in place, we may have been better prepared for was Shopco. That's one that we were reactive to, that if we had a committee together that we'd already went through and discussed some of these areas, that when somebody came looking, we could say, here you go, here's this, here's, even if it was just, here's the cost, here's what it's going to take, and have all those questions answered in almost immediately, would benefit an investor immensely. So, I don't know.
Do we have some structure to the ordinance? Maybe that's where we need to start. We have some
Absolutely.
structure to the ordinance that we can look at.
Yeah, and
I like,
go ahead.
I was gonna say, I really like, I've been thinking about it over the last few minutes what Councilman White said about keeping it broad as far as the ordinance goes. I like that idea, and I like giving them specific tasks. If we have the ordinance basically be kind of broad and just kind of say what their purpose is in general, but then as, the mayor maybe gives them the specific tasks, and we can stand as a council what those are, and they can change from time to time, or something like that, I think. Because, of course, the city's gonna always be changing, and maybe, putting focus in 3 different areas is a good idea, because then you're not overburdening them with a whole bunch of things, and they've got a specific, target, but anyway.
I think that's really what I'm focusing on, is committee would be fantastic. The collaboration that takes place just because of the existence of the committee, that's gonna be a bonus, period, for all involved, entities involved there. But the things we want to come back to us, we need to be giving them that. So they go to work on it, bring it to us, we take the recommendation, say, fantastic. Here's the next thing, go to work on that. So they have orientation to go to work on, because if we just give them, go to work and bring us whatever you want, very little will come back to us.
And I don't think that was ever the intent, and I agree with that 100%. I think the intent was just that. Irene Hansen's going to be very instrumental in that also. She's going to know what things and what people are looking for, investors are looking for in our area, and she can help task them with those types of things. I agree 100%. And the other thing that point I wanted to make along those lines is sometimes we may know right now what we need to task them with. And then 2 weeks from now, it may be different. And so it's hard to say, well, we have 4 right now, and that's what we want to work on. Because it might be 2 or 3 or 4, and then in 2 weeks it may be, that may not be so important. Really what we want to focus on right now, this is a high priority to focus on this and kids back. But I agree, and that's how it should work.
I think what we're hoping for too is that some of their ideas are gonna tell us what we need to task them to do.
Bingo. And that's why it doesn't make sense to, in my mind, to wait when we already know we have the support of 90% of those that would participate in it anyway. Get it going, we can give them some tasks and things. I mean, we have a couple already. We have a master plan. We have the redevelopment. And I'm sure Irene would have a couple for him immediately. But that's one of the things I'd like to really see is the RBA come to this committee and be involved with helping, you know, some of the redevelopment in our Main Street and their ideas and their thoughts of what they need and what they'd like.
So maybe if we get together the structure of our ordinance and kind of have that ready so that when we formally invite people to be on that committee, we're ready to have the backbone and then we'll have a few things to do. I think those we kind of have to do together, so maybe that's where we need to focus next, is just make sure we are ready to give them that direction.
Give the ordinance, and I think you're right, and I think that would be a good step, and I think as soon as that ordinance is in place and we can get that committee up and going, I think the very next thing would be to do what you said and have that committee meet with a lot of the business owners in the area. And we could give them, you know, we already have some, but I think they would get several. And when we attend that meeting with them, we could say, you know what, we all were there. Here are a few things that I think we'd like you to focus on and make a priority with that.
And we listen with open ears too, if they want some kind of change, you know, to the committee or another purpose or something, we can listen at that point too. I mean, because it's not set in stone ever, we can always make changes.
That's right, and I don't know who made the comment, but it was you, Councilman White, that said they will have some ideas on what they would like to see come out of this committee also. And so to form that and then let them come up with some of those things that would benefit them in their different areas is beneficial, so that it's not something we created, it's something we created together.
There'll be a lot more take ownership. I mean, nobody just likes to be told what they're gonna be focused on, so they gotta be very proactive on what they feel.
Right. I think one of the things that, thank you, Dave, I appreciate that. I felt the same thing, and one of the things I feel with that is if we got the general outline of the committee, some of the purposes, we talk about how many, whether it's a dozen, and that, you know, I think a dozen works well. It doesn't have to be, whatever that may be. The second thing is how long their terms are for, how they're appointed, how they choose a chair, and just those structural items. And then our first planning meeting, or meeting that we'd have with them, is to find out, and to brainstorm. Give them the list that is suggested by the state, but also say, what other things do you want to make sure are incorporated? And an idea that I had is, you know, we want a mission statement, obviously, and we want not only a statement, but a plan of action. And we could have that outlined fairly well, but then give them opportunity to make suggestions on that before it's finalized. And then once it's finalized, you know, it's done. That could be amended through, you know, certain things, but they would have buy-in, they would have input. It's tailored to their needs, but it's also tailored to what the council needs from them. And I see it working very, very well.
Mayor?
Yes.
I had an appointment at 8 o'clock. Is it okay if I leave a little early tonight?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how I'm supposed to do that.
Well, I think it's been a good discussion. Would it be okay if Ryan and I got together, we looked at and maybe get Grant involved, and we go through that and drop an ordinance with, I mean, we can't make a motion, but as long as we have the consent, we'll go ahead and we'll spend the time to drop the ordinance with some of those structural, basic structures, and have it at least ready for an approval in the next council meeting. I told Irene I would meet with her, and I want her input as well, you know, in some of that, in her role in that committee, obviously, whether, talk to her, she said.
I think it would probably be good with Aaron, as much comment and thoughts he has and all the boards he works with.
Yeah.
Could be as involved too, if
Sure.
that would be the recommendation.
Yeah, so that we could at least get it to a point where you felt comfortable that we could bring it to a council meeting.
Yeah, I think maybe you may feel I'm not comfortable. I'm comfortable with the committee idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's just some of the logistics that I guess my experience is saying, we've gotta get some of these things in order. That's what I'm saying.
You
It's
want
not-
the committee to be effective.
We gotta have it effective, because they will lose interest if it's not effective from day one.
I agree.
That's what I'm really focused on, is if we're gonna do it, let's go all in, but let's make it right.
So maybe what we could do, because I feel like, I feel 100% the same way. I want to make sure it's effective. I sit on several boards and committees also, and I know what you're talking about. But with this, I wouldn't be proposing the idea if I didn't feel like it would immediately be effective with some of the parameters that we set. And so what I think would be beneficial is if we could get together and just hammer through some of those so that you feel comfortable with the fact that once it's established, there is purpose to it, then I think that would take that question out. You know.
Yeah, I'd say go to work on the structure of the ordinance itself. I think we've got to, it's absolutely key that we get Irene involved in the right way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's key that we have them working on important things, meaning it would be foolish for us to send the Economic Development Committee off of something that, one, they didn't have the understanding to know they were chasing a ghost, and let them go, and then for them to come back with all this time and energy and effort to find out that, I'm just hypothetical, that it's impossible for us to do that for whatever reason. So when I say structure, I'm not trying to tell them, think this way, do this way. What I'm trying to do is help them be successful. It's like my employees. If I send an employee out to do a task that they virtually can't be successful at, and they spend all this time and effort, come back, and they say, boy, we did this, only to be frustrated because it was impossible for them to be successful at it. But if I can say, here are the guidelines, go do it, come back, they come back, make a recommendation, it's accepted, and they feel great, and they're very empowered to do it. That's the mindset I'm talking about as I talk about that committee, because that committee, these are some very expensive meetings when you have some of these folks in the room of their time. We've got to make sure it's productive.
Absolutely, and that's the thing, is each one of them are members of same type of committees. And this isn't something that, to be completely honest, this isn't something that, this has come from them more than it's come from me or anybody else. And so if they see the value in it, and they know how meetings work, they know how boards work, they know how committees work, pretty confident that they're going to make sure that they're going to assist in the fact that those meetings are going to be productive.
That's the value of having some of those bigger key players, is because they're not going to let us be a failure.
If they thought it was a waste of time, they wouldn't be here tonight, I can tell you that right now. But, and again, I think those things that we task them with will change from time to time. The parameters and the ideas that, even if it's as simple one meeting, or there's a couple meetings in a row, that all it is a coordinating meeting and coordinating their efforts, I think they see a value and a benefit of that in the comments that they made. Now, if there's other things that we task them with, which there will be, that's a bonus for us, because we're getting information back and feedback back that'll help us help them. But ultimately, if we just facilitate something that not only the city, but all the other organizations are all on the same page, trying to work harmoniously together in an effort, I feel like even they think that that's enough of a benefit to be there.
And I think that's an absolute benefit, just the coordination factor.
Yeah. So we'll work on that. Is that okay, Ryan? We'll get together and work on that and draw.
Yeah, I'd love to. I love to under promise and over deliver.
Yeah.
So I would ask that not the 3rd, but the 17th, because then I'm not sure the schedule and timeframe of Grant, but I like to make sure that we allow him enough time. So if that's okay?
Okay.
I don't wanna delay it,
Right.
but I also, I mean, if we're ready.
Well, and
we can meet.
and that'll give us time to make sure that, again, we have the.
Sure, and then we can reach out and set some, so if that's okay, that's kind of the timeframe I would hope that we can work on.
Okay.
So,
I would like to, I'll have some time available the week of the 4th and the week of the 10th. On the 17th itself, I'm actually going to be out of town.
Okay. Well, how long does everyone want to be here?
if the.
We don't have to cover all the agenda items if we don't want.
We're not done.
I'm just kidding. All right, thanks, Dave.
I'll take care of your.
I appreciate it.
I got it back.
We need that trust.
I mean, I'm not afraid.
We get a tie vote.
Nothing to report is what I'm gonna tell you.
All right, with that, let's move on to the Duchesne County Water Conservancy. Thank you, everybody, for your input, and that's valid, that's all valid and good. We'll get working on it.
You want me to cover, you want to talk on it?
I can introduce it, and then if I miss anything, let me know.
That's fine, either way you want to go.
So, with Duchesne County Water Conservancy District, we have an agreement with them for, there's 3,000 acre feet available in Sand Wash Reservoir. We currently have contract for all 3,000 acre feet. However, the Division of the Interior is leasing, I guess, 1,500 acre feet of fish flows currently. And so that 3,000 is ours, but 1,500 acre feet of it is being leased or subleased to the DOI for fish flows. That contract is a 5-year contract and will come up in 2020. And I've talked to Central Utah Water and Duchesne County. Central Utah Water has stated that the DOI will no longer be renewing those contracts for fish flow, which means we would be on the hook for the additional payment of 1,500 acre feet. I think Ryan mentioned it was $200,000.
Yeah, almost $210,000 between the base payment and the O&M, so almost $210,000.
So
that's for 1,500 acre feet, not for 3,000.
Right. We can renew. We have a 5-year contract with Duchesne County Water Conservancy District for that 3,000 acre feet. That will also come up in 2020, I believe. And if we want to keep that 1,500 acre feet, we'll have to contract for that and pay that $200,000. Or they would like us to let them know as soon as possible if we want to keep the additional 1,500 acre feet or not, so that they can find somebody else to purchase that 1,500 acre feet. And so we're kind of in this. We have a year and a half to make a decision, but we don't want to put them in a position where right at the last minute we say no and they're stuck holding the bag. So we're trying to figure out a way to work with them to market it, or and so I guess it's on there for the council for discussion to see what are some ideas, what are some thoughts, do we need the water?
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's summarized fairly well. A few things I would add is we have used that 1,500 or about 1,200 acre feet is what we're currently using of it. We've used that to the largest users. We've extended secondary water over the past few years, over the past 6 or 7 years really. To extend that out, we've got a lot of the large users already on secondary. So in order to expand much farther, I don't know that we have large users that will facilitate another 1,500 acre feet. If we took it out to the whole city, we may not have that many that will take the 1,500 acre feet throughout the summer and when it's available. So there is a balance between how much do we want to pay for and hold on to for the future, and how much do we say, you know what, we expect our growth and that over the next 20 years to allow us another 500 acre feet. Maybe there's some lower hanging fruit that we can still pick off. But at some point, one, it's not necessarily a profitable venture to go to. We're not making a lot on it. In fact, we have some of a loss, and depending on how you calculate the base rates in that. But it's not necessarily in our best interest to grow it for profit. But what has really helped up to this point is to reduce the pressure on our Hayden wells. Currently, we don't have that kind of pressure. I mean, we've got 1,300 gallon a minute that we're using on a regular basis, and from our wells we could be at 4,000 to 5,000. So we're not pressed on our wells right now. With Victory adding on, with Secondary adding on, and with our Hayden, 3 different connections in, and with our irrigation water, we've got a lot more water that we utilize. We've locked up a lot of water right now, which oftentimes is good. But when we talk about hard money, we're saying, hey, maybe we don't want to lock up the entire extra 1,500 acre feet.
How much does this compare on a rate per 1,000 gallons?
It's cheap.
Because it's cheap, but like we can't sell it for $133 an acre foot to a farmer to irrigate, because theirs are way cheaper than that.
So what is the cost per acre foot?
Give me just a second here. The cost per acre foot is,
I did 133.33.
Yeah, I was gonna say, let's calculate it as 133.
Yeah.
That's more M&I cost than agricultural cost.
Well, agriculture in our subdivision, we pay like $17 per acre foot.
Right.
And that depends on how many acre feet you get because of the water.
It's approximately 40 cents per 1,000 gallons to compare raw water.
How many cents per thousand?
About 40 to 41 cents per 1,000 gallons.
Just addressing, I was on the council when we took the extra 1,500, and I mean, the guarantee then was that we could keep the ownership, and then the state was gonna buy it, use it. So we thought that it's a win-win situation, because we would still have the rights. Now it looks like that win-win is coming to a conclusion of that, but if, the thought was whatever water wasn't gonna cost us, and you had the rights, that was a no-brainer to me. It was unanimous.
So a proposal that I would propose to the council to consider is, one, allow the city to market it out over the next year to see if we can find interest. I have talked to a few oil field companies, and our interest there is saying, hey, if we can market you secondary water during the summer, we can supplement it with culinary water in the winter. Because at that point, that would balance, and we have the ability that we could balance that. Because our usage of culinary water is still pretty high in the summer, so we could balance that and pull that off. So if we had the ability to market it out for the next year or so, 9 months, year, be able to have some time, and then at that point decide and say, hey, maybe we want to keep 500 acre feet for growth, so that puts us up to 2,000. It gives us some room to grow, some ability. And then if we could market out the rest, and if we don't end up marketing it, and we find nobody's interested, then we give sufficient time back to the Water Conservancy District that they can actually market it as well and say, okay, we're marketing, we're actively out there, but if you can actively market as well. Another one is talking about diversion points. Before, we've asked them about extra diversion points. This would be our opportunity to say we want to be able to have a diversion point farther upstream so that we can sell it. Maybe we can sell it to Cedarview. Maybe we can sell it to oil field farther upstream than it is when it hits our system. Maybe we can sell it to the Cove. Maybe we can do other options.
Can we break up the 1,500? We can break that up?
I think so. That would be.
Because I think that it seems like they've mentioned it's all or nothing.
I remember when we
wasn't
purchased an allocation from
it was
All over
6
there.
years ago, 5 years ago. At that time, we had to take that 1,500 acre foot block.
And that would be a decision of the Duchesne County Water Conservancy District, because ultimately, from my understanding, they're the ones that hold the right.
Of the water.
Or at least they're in charge of managing that. Because if we don't take that 1,500 acre feet, it falls back into there, and they would be liable. The other thing is I talked to Clyde tonight, right before the meeting, when I was talking about getting that contract, to make sure that we had the actual contract. And he was saying it may be beneficial, before we make any formal decision tonight, to have him come and maybe a few of his board and just discuss what the options are. Because he said if we could work together on this,
On this 1,500.
on the 15, we may be able to come up with a much better solution.
I think that's really wise.
He was talking about there was possibly an oil field company that would be willing to build a pond that would where we could put the 3,000 acre feet that we currently have, and then they could use sand wash for additional storage, other storage. And
So they would be moving storage from Sand Wash to somewhere else. Give 3,000 more acre feet in Sand
in
Wash.
capacity, correct. And so that was also talked about, and so there's different options of what we can do with this water. I think maybe the best thing to do is somehow get with them, whether it's this meeting or have a work meeting or just go to one of theirs and discuss some of those options, and then start.
It'd be great to try to keep the control of it. That would be my, I think that's all of ours. But if we can sell it ourselves.
One thing, my dad was talking to me about the development they're planning out by Eagle Mountain, like 9,000 homes on 300 acres or whatever it is. But as soon as the need for water for residential increases that much, the state will take water and say it's a much more beneficial use out here than it is for a farm.
True.
I don't know, because our drainage isn't piped there, but the Duchesne River is, and so we gotta, like Dave said, we've gotta hang on as much as we can, because
I agree.
We won't get many more chances to.
because that's where the water's gonna go eventually, and even though we have it,
Do you
we
know
may not have it.
Do you know why there's 9,000 homes going in Eagle Mountain? Because of the CUP,
Yeah. Because
the
there's water.
Central Utah project. And they put in some large infrastructure pipelines and things to facilitate that. Otherwise, that would never, and that's, you're right, water equals growth. And if you have water, you can grow, and if you don't, you won't. And so I wouldn't want to give up any, but find a creative way to keep it and market it. So
Let's pursue that.
I think both of them. I mean, let's visit with them, let's try to market it, let's do all we can to find the right spot for that water that we still have.
Like what Ryan mentioned, let's see if we can do it. If we can't work with them in doing it, let's try all of our avenues to keep it.
Absolutely.
Agreed. The good thing is, just from a Central Utah standpoint, just to give you a little update, they have several wells, Geneva wells, that they're drilling out there. And,
Just up on it.
and that line, they're only utilizing a very small capacity of that line. So luckily with the water rights that they've acquired through Geneva and stuff like that, they won't be hopefully pulling any more water over the mountain for now, but you never know when that could happen.
It is
We don't have a lot of power over them.
crazy how fast things are growing out Wasatch Front.
Yeah.
It's just.
Well, it's really all I-15. I mean, from the north
all the way from
border to
St.
the
George to
southern
Logan.
border. You're not on the freeway, it's pretty hazardous to our economic growth. I mean, that's also nice to not be so busy.
That's true. I like driving 5 minutes to work every day.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we talk about our being the envy of a rural community, but over the last 10 years, how much has our population grown? And what's to say that's not gonna continue?
Right.
So we may, in 10 more years or 20 more years, be thinking, I gotta find some other place to live, it's too crowded here.
Which is yeah, that's a good point. So maybe what we should do is I would be happy to talk with Clyde and see when we can visit with him. And I don't know how you wanna proceed, maybe if it's we all get together with them.
How soon time frame are we?
We have a year and a half to get this done. I know that sounds like a lot of time, but when you're trying to sell 1,500 acre feet of water.
I think do something like we were doing with Johnson, not to come in and be a whole city council till we get to a point of
Sure.
really, so.
Would there be any volunteers on working on that?
Happy to help there. I really think that even the city manager together
Would be a
kick
good
that off and work
Yeah,
on it
get us going and
for a long period of time.
Would there be one councilman that would assist us? I think
I'd be happy to be part of it.
Great.
I
So
probably have more flexibility.
we have us three. Let's get after it.
That'd be great.
Okay. Sounds good.
The other thing, obviously, I hate to keep talking master plans, but yes, that will be another thing that we need to have our secondary master plan included in the application. If we can get the secondary master plan to know where low-hanging fruit is and identify those, that should also help us to know some of that, although we know that we'll have some interest in some marketing off, but if we knew where our next low-hanging fruit was and knew where we were going, that would be also helpful.
Ryan, I got a question on that. We obviously know how much water we use daily and monthly as a city. How much, if you take the large users out of that equation, so now with the secondary users, and the remaining residents of the city and smaller users of secondary, would it ever pencil out for us to expand secondary? Because
No.
that's what it sounds like. So I guess, to me, the secondary expansion maybe doesn't deserve a lot of attention.
I think there's some that says, hey, if there's a new subdivision going in and we require them to connect on, if there's, some that are currently, we're expanding a road and we're saying, hey, you know what, here's a road we've got secondary on this one end, let's just add it as we go. Those kind of things, when it's a secondary to the project, then I think that, yeah, we'll continue to move forward, but to go out and to get a $5 million project to go through the rest of the city and tear up all the roads and put into secondary is not gonna pencil out for you. But if we're there and we're doing a project and we've got the funds, let's extend project by project, but if we're not gonna pencil out a huge project. It's just more.
No, I was just gonna say, I think you're right with the integrating it with projects, because ultimately, if we do grow, we still have, we have the Victory pipeline, but realistically, when I hear about how strained our water system was before the secondary came in, we were in pretty big trouble.
Hey, it was a savior. The only problem is they were told it was gonna be free.
Yeah.
That was the misleading.
Right.
But it is.
But so the things we've done, we've picked up all of Durgan, so all of Durgan is new to that.
Which we
All
need
of
to talk
Victory is new
about.
to that.
I need to mention something to you, and we need to discuss something on Durgan.
Okay,
Don't let me forget about that.
okay, is it irrigation or culinary?
Culinary.
Okay, so we have those two, so Durgan came on, well,
Has to
number
do with
5
the
came.
water right we have.
What's that?
Has to do with the water right we have.
Okay, so we have that one, we have, the Hayden well number 5 that we put on line, we added Victory and we added secondary. So when you talk about when we were pressed, you gotta understand, there's been a lot of work at it since that point. We're not in the same world today as we were then, with all of the different pieces of that puzzle that have been added. So when we talk about it, we're talking about different worlds. So keep that in
It
mind.
was a savior at that time, and that was a big, huge thing.
Huge.
We've been very fortunate. We've got secondary in, we've put Victory in.
That's right.
We positioned ourselves very well.
Any other comment on that?
Just one last comment, if I might. We have been approached, what's that?
so you may.
Thank you. We have been approached to purchase additional K2 water shares. In the past, I think that that's been something, hey, when somebody comes, we purchase. At this point, we've had that been approached. It's a fair price. But for the number of shares, we already have a significant amount we don't use and then we lease out. And so the question comes is, are we willing to spend our limited reserves funds that we have on buying water rights that we may need and use, but it comes to the same kind of question, how much do we want to spend into that when, once we own it, we can't sell it?
And that's what I was going to get. I didn't know that that was an option, but with what I've seen so far with K2 and with what we utilize limitedly on the golf course, right?
Right.
If you look at the overall benefit, I don't think it benefits the city as much as it would benefit agricultural users and those other people. I want to make sure that the city has as much water as we absolutely need, but with the fact that we can't sell that if we don't need it,
ties our hands.
We have over 250 shares of dry gulch water. I think we almost have 200 of K2 itself. So somebody approaches and said, hey, you want to buy another 80 shares of K2, even if they give us a fair price, which is good. But at that point it says, how many more shares you want? Because right now, we just turn around and lease it all out. And whatever we couldn't lease out, then we utilize and maybe fill the golf course. But we can fill the golf course with culinary, with Victory, or with Hayden, with Victory, with K2, with sand wash, and with the code wells. We have 5 sources of water to fill that pond.
I think we should buy some more water shares. I'm just kidding. How many
you want?
proposing?
What's that?
How many are they proposing? 80. I don't know.
Which, in
We're
the
just
fair
under
price
500,000.
market,
Between 4,500 and 5,000 is kind of what market is. And so at this point, that's kind of in a ballpark. If we get into specifics, that's probably a closed session item to talk about specifics.
so we're talking a lump sum of 400,000.
Yeah, we're talking in the 300 to 400,000 range. We probably don't have 400 to take out of the pot to store it, because we could do a lot of things with 400. If we could take 400 to CIB to make a project to do a lot of things, there's
Well, we already have the 1,500 in San Wash that we're not utilizing.
Correct.
And we're trying to figure out a way.
We're trying to figure out how to sell it.
I know.
Or utilize it. So anyway,
It's amazing that we can't resell it. That's just
Yeah.
state constitution.
Well, I think, I'll bet the legislation behind that is so that a municipality couldn't buy up all the water and then make profit
right.
by selling.
Well, and they have more reserves to buy.
Yeah.
And it allows them to say, hey, if you needed it and you bought it, you probably need to keep it to provide to your residents, so that you're not saying, oh, well, let's sell it out because it's lots of money, and now you don't have the water to provide to your residents.
Sure, there's several protections there.
Yeah, but it's state constitution, it prohibits us from selling. So, although we could exchange to better spots if that was available, maybe exchange from one
Why
spot
don't
to
we
another.
buy it and exchange it for the 1,500 acre feet? Because it's a lot cheaper, and that's a one-time deal, not a yearly.
Well, it's a smaller
$200,000.
assessment, right?
Yeah.
But it's irrigation and not M&I.
That's just, if that's not doable, but to me, the numbers would be a lot more in our favor.
So, but anyway,
I just don't, my feeling is we don't pursue it.
is that, I mean, I want consensus, I know we can't necessarily vote.
Maybe at this moment. But at this moment.
Hold off at this point is what I get from a consensus group. I don't see any opposition to that.
You're reading the tarot cards just right.
Hey, I'm just making sure.
Your crystal ball's working.
Okay, all right. As long as it's working, I'm ready to keep it shined up. So
Okay.
there you go.
All right. Purchase orders, we saw those go down. Any questions on purchase orders?
Motion to approve, Mayor.
I have a motion by Councilman White and a second by Councilman White. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. Okay, reports from standing committees. Councilman Latham?
Met with the city, what do you call the meeting yesterday morning?
Park and Rec, I think, is what you had.
When they report everything, yeah, it's always, we could do, all of our other committees like you're talking about there, I've been very impressed with Ali Scherer, and they coordinate and help each other. And it's the end of the budget time, and they reviewed, and all the openings, everything was good, and, so that's what I've had to report on. I did go to the, I think, the bike one.
Yeah, the trails
In
committee.
between our last one too, and that's dwindling in interest right now.
Who else is moving? That was
Mike Hawley.
Mike Hawley.
Okay, yeah.
And he's really been a spearhead, I think, on that. So,
I think it dwindles because summer's come. I think there will be more, and where we have money to fund the study,
that
I think
could
there will,
stir it up.
I think that will stir it up as we get somebody on board, to head that up and head that money.
But they do say
200,000
that
makes a good progress for
the
people.
meeting yesterday with the ones that had worked within the city and helped build what's the
bike track,
yeah,
pump track.
that it's dwindled since last year because they haven't done what they said they would do and keep it up and
Yeah.
in the volunteer work on
And
it.
I think I know I keep harping this, but if we had an Arts, Parks and Rec committee that met regularly, they could
That would help. I
keep
mean,
tabs on that and make sure that there was assignments. I know several people that I could talk to that would probably be interested in being on that. Cody Allen would be one, Jason
Yeah.
Wallace would be another one. So we could get the support there. I think the follow-up is so critical.
they need some people with some equipment that can be donated more.
Yeah. And that could all be done through those, if the bike committee was meeting with the city committee and it was one general committee that came together, they all have their own little facets that they're working on, but they come together and coordinate those things would be phenomenal.
This one is all employees.
This is all employees.
So that one's a little different. That wasn't.
Yeah,
But
but we could have a
But we're
few of those
coordinating.
employees be a part of that committee to where
yeah,
the bikes would be there, the bike committee would be there, a few employees would be there, several other entities to
I think, I mean, saw a lot of great things with committees when I was on the school board too, that got things done. But you gotta have a focus and they dwindle, but they can get a lot of things done.
One item that we did talk about was, use of city equipment,
Yes.
That was brought up tonight. But we have found a lot of issues when city equipment is used outside of the city. We utilize a lot of that equipment, and for insurance and other things, we don't want somebody on their off time using it we don't let people use it for personal use or for,
And that's
for
great,
non-business
because it
use.
used to be.
So,
I think, in my opinion, if we're gonna do it, let's charge them an hourly rate and then go do it.
Yeah.
I mean,
And I think he's willing to rent it or pay for it. I think he
Like he
wants.
said he did.
right, at that point, I understand that one. But generally speaking, we'll get questions and say, hey, can I just borrow your, and then fill in the blank? And at this point, we're saying, you know what, we're not renting, we're
I think
not
one
loaning
thing-
out.
Yeah.
But
One thing I think we need to be careful of is distinguishing private entities and public entities. And the school being a public entity and taxpayers pay their wages just like they pay our city wages. And so coordinating between public entities and utilizing things back and forth publicly, I think is okay. Where we get into trouble is when we start having private entities wanting to utilize those same things. And we
Or
have to make that-
personal.
or
When
personal.
Aaron and I first came on the city council, we faced a lot of those issues with vehicles and other equipment, the employees taking them and doing other things, and it took a while to clean. I'd hate to see it go back to where it was in any way, shape, or form.
I agree. I think we could just set a.
we
this is
do
my
it
own-
with Ballard, we put up their signs, we charge them a fee and we'll put up their banners.
Yeah.
So we do that with other entities, we do that with Cedar View,
I think
so.
public entities that are owned by the citizenry, we ought to do everything we can to help and assist. And then when it comes to private or personal, that's an absolute no. That would be I don't get a vote. I just
Well,
didn't.
it's helpful to know that maybe just the way it was proposed wouldn't fit, but if we said, if you wanna rent it from us and we'll do it on city time and this is the fee,
Right,
it covers our
we would have to be
liability and
operators,
that kind of
so that we're operating city equipment. And I know he had brought it up, we use that equipment that he's asking for constantly. We're using it at the golf course, we're using it at the cemetery. This year has been a difficult one for us to make it there, to fulfill his request. Actually has been difficult because if you've been to the golf course, we've reseeded it quite a bit. Spent a lot of time there in this winter kill. We've spent a lot of time in our Centennial Park. So we've used the heck out of the machine. So we're using it quite a bit. So at that point, but we want to be helpful, and granted, we want to be helpful to those.
We need to show
see the
that
same.
in an open meeting.
What's that?
Too. And we need to do it publicly in an open meeting to keep the public relations.
Yeah.
That way, and then you work it out and make it happen.
Well, I'll be honest, there are going to be some favors that we as a city, and I'll be asking of the school district to work with us on when we get kids basketball. I'd like to see that. I have several people come to me about, a Roosevelt League of basketball and other things that would be coming up, and we're going to want to use those. And so, just keeping in mind, in my industry, when I have a competitor, somebody, whatever I charge them, I'm going to be charged. So we just need to make sure that we remember that.
And
if we want to rent the schools and things like that, then or however we work that, it's got to be a two-way street. So just some things.
And we have contracts to use their gyms, so that's in their contract.
We're going to use them a lot more.
We use a lot of the gyms, and there is a lot of activities that they use in our equipment, which is our parks and that. It's a good relationship, and it needs to be stayed that way. It needs to be a good relationship.
Absolutely. Councilman Lehman, did you have anything?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
I don't have anything, and I told David I would report for him that he didn't have anything.
Okay.
Way to go.
One thing really quickly, I went to the strike force meeting today in Fernal. One of the things that, again, we talked about, obviously, we mentioned before, a lot of crime stems from substance abuse. And so the strike force is very instrumental in tackling some of that. I know we've already approved an additional officer or two.
Additional officer, you're right.
And,
we're like too short. The chief told me.
Yeah.
So that they've been running short.
Right.
Anyway.
And what I was thinking is, maybe we could look a little harder at training too. We have one right now, maybe training another one that would be available for the strike task force. The other things that I think would be very instrumental in dealing with our drug problem is education. And so I've talked to Officer Glethill and about coming to the council, maybe having a public meeting. I feel like today, as I was listening to the problems and issues that we have, a lot of the things that are happening with legislation are due to the fact the public doesn't know what's going on or what laws being made affect the police and the crime rate in their cities. And so if we could get the public educated, one, and then help them understand the difficulties that the police face in taking care of drug homes and those types of things, and really making it a community problem and not just an officer problem, I think we might get a lot further. And so I think it would be good to have some meetings where we open it to the public and educate them on the how it works. Anyway, that's just something that I think we ought to look forward, moving forward, look at doing. So I think that's all I had. I had a busy day, and I think I already said just about everything that I've done. So got some weight.
We've had a couple of Red Bud Run training since then. I did not attend the last one, I actually didn't attend the last two. The last
We
two
just
ago, I
decided to
attended via phone, kind
If
of,
you weren't attending it, just get it out, I was gonna try.
but I appreciate what they're doing. They've got it all.
And they talked a lot about that in the meeting, the Parks and Recreation meeting that run.
And UBIC runs very, very well. That's, in reality, there's very little interaction from a committee level with UBIC. Chad and Jean Liddell and, for heaven's sakes, what's her name? Her maiden name was, I'm drawing a blank. Used to work for the city. He was the mechanic.
Oh, Davis.
Yes. Lori Davis.
Oh,
Lori White.
Lori,
Yeah.
yeah.
The three of them do a lot of heavy lifting on UBIC.
Councilman Burdick.
Just, if anybody gets a chance, go drive through Stonegate. Oh, that's paved. It's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
It's where the burnout's gonna be this year.
If anybody gets a chance, fly over Stonegate. It's even more, yeah, I was flying over that the other day and thought, that just looks
It sure improved
amazing.
the
It's nice, isn't it?
market value of everything out there.
Absolutely.
I was
Hey,
talking to Councilman.
Take somebody with you to take a picture, so we can put that in our bulletin.
I have drone shots from Joe Goodell.
Okay, perfect.
But my plane will be done, so I'll let you go up first and then you can take a picture. But,
Well, if weather's good, I'll go tomorrow.
There you go.
so, anything else?
I was just saying that, just a few years ago, that was a gigantic nightmare. And now it's a beautiful new portion of Roosevelt City.
It's amazing. A lot of heavy lifting involved with that, like you said, and that's amazing that it's coming to an end.
And the chips and seal and the painting that has been laid down now on Lagoon Street and State Street.
We started on roads this last 12 months, or the last fiscal year.
No, I mean, just though they were a little slow getting
Right,
painted,
those two.
but it looks, I just was
I
looking
mean,
at
they
it
were
today.
announcing that on radio, that it was going to be done on Monday.
Yeah.
Their equipment,
Oops.
you never know when they have equipment issues. So.
Yeah, but yeah, it was just great. Ryan?
Just a couple of things, invite you to, UBAC's meeting to review, CIB application. It'll be in Manila on, was it the
It's the 28th, I believe.
Yeah, the 28th in Manila at 10:30, so if you want to come, we'd love to have you.
We've always sent an invitation out recently.
So that's on a Thursday?
Yeah.
I think she said.
Thursday, 10:30.
I'm happy to have all of you on if you're interested.
Oh, really?
Going, if they're
Remember
willing
when
to.
They built that in the
Last seen it.
That's where they have that.
It's in Manila, so didn't know that.
I'll add, just real quick.
Can you give us a reminder?
I'll just send a meeting invite out just here right now, so, you should be able to get it here quickly. But, we have that one on the 28th. On the 5th, we have and I have sent that meeting invite out to everybody. The CIB meeting out in Salt Lake to have them review the application. So anyway, anybody's welcome. If you haven't been to a CIB meeting lately, this would be a great one to go to. Generally, they're pretty kind on planning grants, especially when it's 50-50, and that's what we're asking for. Planning grant, 50-50, we're hopeful they're kind on it. Our last master plan was done in 2010 for a general plan, and some of the sub-plans were done in 12. So it's time for us to update all of those. And we have done a lot of work and made a lot of progress in the last couple of years, and it will be necessary for us to get together with those. We have added into that plan, a economic development and a trails, rec and park plan. So we have, added 2 extra plans that we would look to facilitate in that application. So,
What's the amount that
we're asking for 200,000 grant and bringing $200,000 in
of our own?
And we have that in the budget. So in the budget this year, it's past that 200,000.
Right, I was thinking 300, but that's probably before we added
the others. So, so another one is we've done quite a bit of work on our streets. Our LTAP was last done in 2012, so it's time to update it. They are out this week here in town evaluating streets, so they're out and about. We won't get their report until probably time that they're in school, because they'll actually write it while they're in school. They attend USU and they'll do the on-site during the summer, but then they'll write the plans during their school year. So we won't get it before August at least, and it'll probably be August, September, something.
Yeah.
What's that?
So I remember when the last one happened, I can't believe it's been that long.
So, yep, it's been quite a while, so it's time to update it. So we're working on that one. We also have, and I don't know when you guys want to be done with this, but I'm here all night, so,
like 30 seconds.
well, I think what you might want to see is our plan and how we put it together. We have talked about putting a plan together. We've incorporated it into our GIS. Give me 3 minutes to log into this.
You know, I found Duchesne County, well, it's our own GIS.
It's our own GIS.
Luckily, Duchesne County's not working.
Yeah, and I do have it so that I can access that through our GIS. If I learn GIS better, I could really have all of that.
This individual that Dirk Hatch has coming over, he does all their GIS. Maybe you guys should be friends.
I would love to be friends with anybody. I don't have enough friends, and I'm happy to have more. So I won't reject a friend at all. So he's welcome.
He would be an asset, I think, for you in learning that and doing that. So, and I think it'd be great to work together with them.
So they reported into the county, and I can pull theirs off. So
Getting all
just kind of show you what we've got.
Boundaries, everything on the satellite image.
Okay.
I don't know what the actual name is.
More information system.
Do we have other things that are on our agenda?
No.
So that one right there. It's been a great night. A lot of good.
Yeah, very.
There was a lot of energy in the group that came, and it was very positive.
Yeah. We've had some really, I mean, we're making some good headway with Johnson, with Duchesne County, with, you know, just keep that rolling.
What you reckon?
That's going to be a real benefit to our economy and part of that economic development.
Water, roads, and education, always
So
key elements.
what you can see, if you can see this on the map, it's a lot of colors. But what the nice thing is with our plan, we can come in here and determine and say which roads have failed and have a remaining surface life of less than 2 years, so between 0 and 2 years. If I turn that on, you can see which roads, and these are the roads. So once we get our LTAP updated, we have already finished 700 East. We've already finished 600 South. So we've already finished some of them. We already finished Wilkins, and we already finished this one. So these ones up here will be in our application we had that just got funded. So these ones will be fixed up here. And this puts us so that we can work on based on need rather than based on you know, somebody based on noise, based on public. We'll do it based on condition of the road and say, hey, well, at this point, these are the worst roads in town. And as we move forward, then, you know, say we have a project to mill and fill or to reconstruct, we come here. But if we say, hey, you know what, we want to know which ones we want to maybe we want to chip seal. And so we come in and say, okay, well, what's the useful life that's the remaining life between 4 and 6 years? We can chip seal them and add them so they have another 5 years. So maybe we want to keep, at that point, they're right there this year, 5 years or less. And so we come in and say, okay, well, let's go out and chip seal a lot of these. We've already done that. So as we get our LTAP data, we'll put that in there and we'll be able to pull up as a staff, we'll say, hey, planning wise, what are we at? How many miles is this? What do we need to work on? We say, you know what? Hey, this one shows we're not doing this street, but we are doing this one. Let's just do all of those while we're there. Let's get it done while we're in close proximity. Maybe we take all of Lagoon Street, which we did, but there were 2 blocks that it said, those can wait another year or 2. We said, well, let's just do the whole stretch. And that's what we chose to do this time, even though those 2 little blocks may not have needed it. But as we're going out, and we can do that. It's a lot easier to do 10 blocks than 1 block and then skip one, and 1 block and then skip one. So at that point, that's kind of our methodology that we have. We can sort by lots of different layers. So that's where we're getting to. We're going to get a lot more. You'll see this map a lot more over the next few years. So
do you know how happy this will make? Do you know how happy this makes me personally? Because this is exactly, I think, how it should be done. And I know it had been mentioned, and I had mentioned it.
We've been working on this for 9 months, and we just got it from our engineer. We've been working on this for quite a while, and we're happy to get in. But some of the things that we can put on this, what we'd like to eventually do is put on where the strata is and say, hey, and we've talked to them and said, where your GIS information so that we can have that. So when we have an economic development conversation, we can say, here's where that utilities are. Where's Moon Lakes? Let's put them in, and we've talked to them about it. Where the schools have maybe a layer for them to say, hey, where's the population at?
Or natural gas.
And natural gas. And as we look, and so we can pull this up and we can say, hey, we can do a lot of information and data stored in one spot rather than sending somebody back and saying, hey, why don't you go find out whether that is available? We can store it here and house it here so that when we meet as a committee, we pull this up and say, yeah, we have these 4 locations that we can do this. Let's take a look at those.
Or here's an area that we need utilities in, and what is it going to take to get it?
Absolutely.
I think we have a theme or an item for our first meeting is we'll task them this is what we're looking at, the very next meeting that we have. Can you bring your information back? And at least get it to Ryan.
Yeah, and we can take those shape files, we can put them in. Now, I obviously need more training, and so I'm going to have that as some of my goals is to be more trained on this. But we can pull up planning and zoning and say, all right, let's overlay the planning and zoning on it. Let's overlay, and we can create lots of different layers to find out exactly what we want and where we're going. So
when you request this information from Horace, do they have it? We started this literal process 4 years ago.
Yeah, they have some, but they didn't have the color coding of the maps, and we couldn't sort and determine, useful
They just had some raw data.
So yeah, what they have, and they have a lot of information. I should give them credit where credit's due. They have some of that. We added the streets layer. We have been working with them for a long time on a utility layer. I hope we have the right one.
I love it. I mean, I'm very familiar with GIS systems and Azure-based systems. I just think it's fantastic. But I'm glad to see us getting to where we started to go 4 or 5 years ago. So my compliments to you. Good job.
So this one will show, we have all of our different infrastructure. So it's we can take off layers, but we can determine, okay, well, do we want culinary, secondary? As we go through, we can take off different ones we don't want to address. And so as things come in, we can say, hey, you know what, we want to know where our culinary points are. Maybe we want to know where our fire hydrants are. We can zoom to different pieces of that. This will show all our fire hydrants. Eventually, eventually what we'd like to do is take the fire hydrant one to the fire department and say, hey, here is what you've got. So you can use it, you can pull it up on your phone, and once we publish it out, they'll be able to pull it up and say, hey, here's the address, oh, well, here's the fire hydrants. And so here's where you're looking. You click on that fire hydrant, and it'll tell you the flow. It'll tell you details. We'll eventually get flows at this point. This is how, but we're working on it.
Just thinking fire department, that's what they're concerned.
I know, and at some point, we'll get those flows entered. We'll get a lot more data, and as we build this, it will make a lot more progress. And as we pull that data in-house, now our expectation of our engineers is if they complete a project, they'll give us that data, we'll enter it here, then when the next engineer comes on for the next project, we have the data, they can pull and basically check out their data, and here's what we're working on and put it back. At that point, we'll be able to have a central repository for all of the different engineers we work with, and we work with several at this point. We're a multi-engineer entity, yeah. So
It's great.
we're using 3 engineers actively right now and courting a 4th. Well, we're using 4 right now with the airport. We're using 4 actively and courting a 5th to see what we do and have them help us with. So we're active in that. Anyway, it's one of those things we're excited about. There is so much that we can get ahead of. But in essence, we truly have been so far behind in some of it that we are making a huge shift, and it'll take us time to get to where we really want to be. But I assume that someday we're going to pull that up, and that's going to be an active thing we look at as we talk and discuss. We'll talk them through when planning and zoning meets. We'll pull that up and say, hey, here's the layer, here's what can be there. So anyway, that's kind of one of our things we're working on. We are working on an application planning grant to help us with Cottonwood Creek and being able to clean up Cottonwood Creek and the trail system there. So we are working on that one. We've just finished our safety sidewalk grant that we had. We're going to look to apply for another one going from State Street to the cemetery. We're meeting with McIntyre tomorrow to identify others.
He was most enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
I just loved his
It's fun.
forward, open.
It's fun. I'm gonna learn how to be quick, discreet, and leave. I'm gonna learn that. I'm gonna learn that better. I'm not very good at it at this point, but I want to fill you in with so much information that we are. We're working on so many different aspects. We're so happy to have Stonegate done. We'll finish up the walkthrough next week. We're finishing chip seal work. We're starting in on 800 South. We're going to make progress on it. The sewer line's out to bid. The grant that we received around East Elementary for the sidewalks, we've got that out to bid right now. And so we're working to progress because we believe that as we build infrastructure, that is what facilitates economic development. And as we get that in the right spots, then development can happen. And as we improve areas, that people want to develop their own area, and they'll clean it up as we show interest and we show investment into the area. So will they. And we've seen that time and time again, and we believe that will continue to happen. So anyway, that's my report, but I'm open to any questions unless you want to go home tonight. Otherwise, I'm here all night.
Sometimes tonight would be good, but I wanted to say I do appreciate the report, and I appreciate everything that's going on in the city. There's a lot of things happening, a lot of good things in all aspects, and so thank you. Any other items of business?
Need a motion to adjourn?
Yes, please.
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Glad to get all that, Carolyn? Thanks.
That happened quick.
Ready for that. Hey, thanks, everyone.